A 14-year-old boy walks up to a man who could kill him with one hand. The biker hasn't spoken to a stranger in 3 years. But the kid holds something that changes everything, a coin that disappeared 20 years ago with a missing girl nobody ever found. Wrapped around it, 6 words that turn Damon Cross's blood to ice. He knows you're finally looking again. Someone's been watching. Someone used this child as a messenger. And the last person who carried that coin vanished into a darkness no one survived. What happens next will shatter everything you think you know about justice, brotherhood, and how far one man will ride to keep a promise to the dead. Stay with me until the very end. This one hits different. If you're watching right now, drop a like, hit subscribe, and comment your city below so I know where this story is reaching tonight. Let's ride. The rain had been falling over Ridgecrest, Illinois for 11 days straight. Not the kind of rain that washed things clean. The kind that turned the ground soft enough to bury things in. The kind that made the whole town smell like rust and old concrete and something rotting beneath the surface that nobody wanted to name. Damon Cross stood inside the garage bay behind the Iron Vale Motorcycle Club's clubhouse, with his hands buried inside the engine block of a 1997 Harley Softail that hadn't run in 4 years. Grease blackened his knuckles. His forearms carried scars older than most of the prospects who came through the door asking to patch in. A faded Marine Corps tattoo wrapped around his left wrist, not the proud kind men showed off at barbecues. The kind that sat there like a bruise that refused to heal. He was 41 years old. He looked 50. He moved like a man carrying something heavier than his own body, and every brother in the club knew better than to ask what it was. The garage smelled like motor oil and cold metal, and the last cigarette he'd smoked an hour ago, the filter still smoldering in an ashtray made from an old piston. Rain hammered the corrugated roof above him in uneven bursts. Outside, the parking lot was empty, except for 3 bikes and a rusted pickup truck that belonged to no one and had been sitting there since last winter. Ridgecrest was the kind of town that forgot itself. Population signs hadn't been updated in a decade. The high school lost its football program 6 years ago. The police department operated out of a converted hardware store with 3 full-time officers and a dispatcher who also worked part-time at the gas station on Route 9. People didn't move to Ridgecrest. People ended up there. And most of them spent the rest of their lives trying to figure out how to leave without admitting they never would. Damon had stopped trying. He wiped his hands on a shop rag that was already more oil than fabric and reached for the cup of black coffee sitting on the workbench. It had gone cold 2 hours ago. He drank it anyway. The bitterness grounded him, kept him from drifting into the places his mind went when his hands stopped moving. 20 years. That was how long his sister had been gone, Cassie Cross. 11 years old when she vanished from a foster home in downstate Illinois on a Tuesday afternoon in October. No witnesses, no suspects, no body. The case file was thinner than a church bulletin, 4 pages of notes, 2 interviews, and a photograph so faded you could barely make out her face. The foster family claimed she ran away. The caseworker signed off on the report without a home visit. The police marked it as a voluntary runaway within 72 hours. She was 11. Damon had been 19 deployed overseas when the Red Cross notification reached him 3 weeks after she disappeared. By the time he got stateside, the trail was colder than the ground she might have been buried in. He spent 2 years searching. Knocked on every door, sat in every waiting room, filed every motion, begged every detective, and every single one of them looked at him the same way, like a man screaming into a room full of deaf people who had already decided the noise wasn't worth investigating. The system didn't fail Cassie Cross. The system never tried. Eventually, Damon stopped asking politely. He started writing. Found the Iron Vale through a veteran named Roach who ran a halfway house for Marines who couldn't sleep indoors anymore. The club wasn't a gang. It wasn't a family either, not the way people use that word in movies. It was a perimeter, a line drawn in gravel and exhaust fumes that said, "This is where the world stops touching us." The brothers didn't talk about their wars. They didn't talk about their scars. They rode and they worked and they watched each other's backs, and they understood that silence was sometimes the only honest language left. Damon became the club's mechanic, then its sergeant-at-arms. Then nothing official at all, just the man who was always there, always working, always the last one to turn off the lights. The brothers called him Ghost. Not because he was invisible, Because he moved through the world like someone who had already died and was just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. He kept one thing from his old life, one object he never showed anyone. A challenge coin his father had given Cassie the week before he died of liver failure in a VA hospital bed. Hand-stamped brass, about the size of a $50, with a rough eagle etched into one side and their father's initials scratched into the other. Cassie had carried it everywhere. It was in her pocket the day she disappeared. It had never been recovered. Damon had spent 20 years believing it was gone forever, buried with whatever truth the world refused to dig up. He was wrong. The sound came first. Not the rain, not the wind rattling the garage door chains. A different sound, smaller, human. The shuffle of wet sneakers on broken asphalt. The kind of sound a body makes when it's trying to move quietly but doesn't know how. Damon set down the wrench without turning around. "Clubhouse is closed," he said. His voice carried the texture of gravel dragged across sheet metal. "Whatever you're selling, we're not buying." Silence. Then a breath. Quick and shallow. The kind of breathing that belonged to someone scared. Damon turned. A kid stood in the open bay door, 14, maybe 15, skinny in the way that suggested meals were optional rather than guaranteed. Brown hair plastered flat against his forehead by the rain. A hoodie 2 sizes too big hanging off narrow shoulders, the sleeves pulled down past his wrists. Jeans soaked through. Sneakers held together with duct tape on the left sole. The kid's eyes were what stopped Damon. Not scared. Not exactly. Something worse. The look of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome of this moment and decided that the worst one was still better than going back to wherever he came from. Damon had seen that look before. In the mirror. Every morning for 20 years. "I'm not selling anything," the kid said. His voice cracked on the second word. He swallowed hard. "My name's Ethan. Ethan Mercer." Damon didn't move. "And?" Ethan's right hand came up slowly from inside the hoodie pocket. His fingers were trembling, not from the cold, though the cold was brutal enough to justify it, from something deeper. The kind of tremor that starts in the chest and works its way out through the extremities. In his palm sat a small brass coin. Damon's entire body went still. Not the stillness of calm. The stillness of a man whose nervous system has just been hit with something his conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. The kind of stillness that precedes either violence or collapse, and the only thing that determines which one is how much control a man has left. "I found this under your motorcycle," Ethan said quietly. "The black one. Out front." Damon stared at the coin. The world outside the garage, the rain, the wind, the distant sound of a train horn, all of it compressed into a single high-pitched tone, like the ringing that follows an explosion. The eagle. Hand-etched, crude but deliberate. The initials on the back, R.C., Robert Cross. His father's coin, Cassie's coin. "Where did you get this?" It wasn't a question. It was a demand pushed through clenched teeth. Ethan took a half-step back. His eyes went wide. "I told you, under your bike. It was inside this." He pulled a weathered envelope from the same pocket. Brown paper, water-stained, sealed with clear tape that had yellowed with age. Or at least it looked like age. The crease patterns were too sharp, too recent. Damon took the envelope. His hands didn't shake. Not yet. 20 years of compartmentalizing trauma had given him that much. The ability to hold still while everything inside him detonated. He opened it. Inside was a single strip of paper, torn from something larger. 6 words written in blue ink, block letters, no signature. "He knows you're finally looking again." The coffee cup on the workbench suddenly seemed very far away. The garage seemed smaller. The rain seemed louder. Damon read the words 3 times, and each time they meant something worse. He looked at Ethan. "Who gave this to you?" "Nobody gave it to me. I found it." "People don't find things like this, kid." "I'm telling you the truth." Ethan's voice hardened, not with defiance, with the specific kind of desperation that belongs to someone who knows they won't be believed and has already exhausted every alternative. "I saw a van parked across the street from your clubhouse. White panel van, no plates. It was there for 3 days. I walked past here on my way home from school. Today, it was gone, and the envelope was sitting right there under the front tire of the black Harley, like somebody put it there on purpose. Damon's jaw tightened. Why didn't you just leave it? Because I've seen that van before. The words landed like a round hitting a steel plate. Where? Damon said. Outside my school. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room when two strangers realize they're standing inside the same nightmare. Damon looked at the coin again, turned it over. The eagle was there, every line, every imperfect scratch he'd memorized from the photograph Cassie had once sent him overseas. But something was different. Along the edge, near the bottom, 3 thin parallel scratches that hadn't been there before. Fresh marks, the kind made by a modern tool. A precision screwdriver, maybe, or a dental pick. This coin hadn't been sitting in the ground for 20 years. Someone had been holding it, handling it, recently. Sit down, Damon said. I should probably sit down. Ethan sat on an overturned milk crate near the workbench. His sneakers left wet prints on the concrete. He folded his hands in his lap the way kids do when they're in a principal's office. Tight, controlled, trying to take up as little space as possible. Damon pulled out his phone and made one call. It rang twice. Church. Now. 2 words. The line went dead. Within 40 minutes, the garage held 6 men who hadn't been in the same room together since a funeral 3 months ago. Roach, the club's founder, 63 years old, a Vietnam-era Marine with a prosthetic left leg and a voice like a diesel engine idling. Hutch, the road captain, who ran long-haul freight during the week and hadn't spoken to his own daughter in 4 years. A prospect named Pike, who was 22 and had already done 2 tours in Afghanistan before his medical discharge. 2 others, Greaves and Bone, who sat in the back and said nothing because that was what they were best at. They stood in a rough semicircle around Damon. None of them looked at Ethan directly, but every single one of them was aware of exactly where the kid was sitting, how fast he was breathing, and whether anyone had followed him in. That was what the Iron Veil did. They watched. They calculated. They didn't react until they understood. Damon held up the coin. This belonged to my sister. The room changed, not in any visible way. The temperature didn't drop, the lights didn't flicker, but something shifted in the air between those men, a collective recognition that the conversation had just crossed a line that none of them could step back over. Roach leaned forward on his cane, his eyes, pale blue, nearly colorless, fixed on the coin with the focus of a man reading a map in hostile territory. Cassie's coin, he said. Not a question. Found under my bike. Inside an envelope. With a note. Damon handed the strip of paper to Roach. The old man read it once, then passed it to Hutch without a word. He knows you're finally looking again, Hutch read aloud. He looked at Damon. You been looking? I never stopped. That's not what I mean. I mean recently, actively. Anything that might have pinged somebody's radar. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, 3 weeks ago I pulled Cassie's old foster records through a contact at DCFS. The caseworker who signed off on her disappearance, a woman named Linda Hargrove. She died in 2019. But before she died, she transferred to a different county. The records followed her. I was trying to find out why. Roach's expression didn't change. Someone noticed. Someone did more than notice. They delivered a message, through a kid. Damon gestured toward Ethan. Tell them what you told me. Ethan looked at the circle of bikers surrounding him. Men with leather cuts and scars and eyes that had seen things no therapist would ever fully reach. Any other teenager might have bolted. Ethan stayed. Not because he was brave, because he had nowhere else to go that felt safer than this garage full of strangers who were actually listening. A white van's been showing up near my school, Ethan said. Started about 2 weeks ago. It parks at the end of Birch Street near the baseball field. No plates, tinted windows. One time I walked past it and the engine was running but nobody got out. You tell anyone? Roach asked. I told my teacher. She said it was probably a contractor working on the new drainage system. Was there a drainage project? No. Roach looked at Damon. The kid walks past this clubhouse every day, Damon said. Whoever left the envelope knew that. They knew Ethan would find it. They knew he'd bring it in. Why him? Hutch asked. Because he's a kid. Because kids ask questions adults have learned to stop asking, and because someone wanted Damon to know they could reach anyone, Roach said. He turned to Ethan. Anyone else asking about you lately? Strangers? People at school? Ethan's hands tightened in his lap. He looked at the floor. There was a man last week. He came to the school office and said he was from Child Protective Services. He asked the secretary about me. She told him I wasn't a CPS case and he left. But I saw him in the parking lot after. He was on his phone. He looked... Ethan paused. He looked like he was checking something off a list. The garage was silent except for the rain. Damon felt something move inside his chest. Not rage, not yet. Something older. The same feeling he'd had 20 years ago when the Red Cross message arrived. And he knew, in that hollow space behind his ribs, that the world had already decided his sister didn't matter enough to save. But this time there was a kid sitting on a milk crate in front of him. This time the warning had arrived before the disappearance. Roach, Damon said quietly. I need to know if this is what I think it is. Don't ask me questions you already know the answer to. I need to hear it. Roach looked at the coin in Damon's hand, then at Ethan, then at the rain still hammering the roof. He took a long breath, the kind that sounds like a man pulling air through scar tissue. Someone's running a pipeline, Roach said. They've been running it a long time, long enough to get comfortable, long enough to use kids as bait and challenge coins as calling cards. And now they know you're digging, so they sent you a message through the one thing guaranteed to make you stop or make you come harder. I'm not stopping. I know you're not. That's what worries me. Damon turned to the workbench. He set the coin down under the fluorescent light and pulled a magnifying loupe from the drawer. The brothers watched as he examined the fresh scratches along the coin's edge. 3 parallel lines, deliberate, uniform spacing. These are tool marks, Damon said. Someone opened this coin. Opened it? Hutch stepped closer. Damon pressed the edge of a flathead screwdriver into the thinnest scratch and twisted. The coin separated along a seam so fine it was invisible to the naked eye. 2 halves, hollowed out. Inside, folded into a space no larger than a thumbnail, was a strip of waterproof paper. Numbers. GPS coordinates. Damon's hands finally shook. He stared at the numbers. His vision blurred for half a second. Not tears. Something chemical. Something his body did when the magnitude of a moment exceeded what his nervous system could process in real time. He blinked it away and read the coordinates again. Somebody tell me what those point to, he said. Pike was already on his phone. His thumbs moved across the screen with the speed of a generation raised on digital warfare. 30 seconds passed. Rural property, Pike said. About 90 miles south, unincorporated county land. The coordinates point to a structure listed as... He paused, looked up. A church. Abandoned since 2008. The room went cold. Not metaphorically. Someone had opened the side door of the garage and a gust of November wind cut through the bay, carrying the smell of wet earth and diesel fuel and something else. Something that might have been nothing but felt like a warning carried on the air itself. Roach straightened. Nobody rides tonight. Roach, I said nobody rides tonight. The old man's voice was iron-wrapped in patience. This is not a sprint. If someone built a network that survived 20 years under legitimate cover, they didn't do it by being stupid. We go in loud and fast and they burn everything. Evidence, witnesses, all of it. And if they move Ethan? Damon's voice was barely controlled. If that van comes back? If whoever showed up at his school comes back with more than questions? Roach turned to Ethan. Where do you live, son? Foster home off Cedar Lane. How many other kids in the house? 3. Foster parents. They good people? Ethan's silence lasted exactly long enough to answer the question. Roach looked at Damon, then at the others. Greaves, Bone. I want eyes on Cedar Lane tonight. 2-hour rotations. You see anything? A van? A stranger? A car that doesn't belong? You call me. Not the police. Me. Greaves and Bone nodded without speaking and walked out into the rain. Within 60 seconds, the sound of 2 motorcycles growling to life cut through the storm. Hutch, Roach continued, I need every piece of surveillance footage within a mile of this clubhouse for the last 2 weeks. Gas stations, traffic cameras, ATMs, anything with a lens. On it. Pike. Pull everything you can on Linda Hargrove, the caseworker, where she transferred, what cases she handled, who signed her paperwork. I want names. Pike nodded. And Damon, Roach's pale eyes locked onto him with a focus that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with the kind of trust that only forms between men who've pulled each other out of wreckage. You don't go near those coordinates alone. You don't go at all until we know what's waiting. Your sister waited 20 years. She can wait 3 more days while we do this right. Damon wanted to argue. Every fiber of muscle, every damaged nerve ending, every sleepless night compressed into a single impulse that screamed at him to get on his bike and ride south until he found something worth destroying. But Roach was right. He'd always been right. 3 days, Damon said. 3 days. Ethan stood up from the milk crate. His clothes were still soaked. His sneakers squeaked on the concrete. He looked at the circle of men around him, these scarred, exhausted, dangerous men who had just dropped everything to protect a kid they didn't know. And something shifted in his expression. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest crack in the armor that every foster kid builds to survive a world that keeps proving it doesn't care. Can I... He stopped himself, swallowed, started again. Can I stay here tonight? I don't want to go back to Cedar Lane in the dark. Damon looked at Roach. The old man gave a single nod. Back room, Damon said. There's a couch and a blanket. Locks on the inside. Nobody comes in without knocking. Ethan walked toward the back of the clubhouse without looking back. His footsteps echoed off the concrete floor, small, uncertain, the sound of someone walking toward the first safe door they'd found in a long time. Damon watched him go. Then he turned back to the workbench and looked at the 2 halves of the challenge coin lying under the fluorescent light. The eagle stared up at him, crude, imperfect, etched by a hand that no longer existed in this world. Cassie. He hadn't said her name out loud in years. It sat in his throat now, like a stone he couldn't swallow and couldn't spit out. He picked up the strip of waterproof paper and read the coordinates one more time. 90 miles south. An abandoned church. And whatever was waiting there had known, for 20 years, that eventually someone would come looking. Roach's hand landed on his shoulder. Heavy, steady. The weight of a man who understood exactly what it cost to hold still when everything inside you was screaming to move. We'll find what she left for you, Roach said quietly, and whatever it is, we'll finish it. Damon said nothing. He placed both halves of the coin back together, slid them into his jacket pocket, and stood in the doorway of the garage watching the rain turn the parking lot into a black mirror reflecting nothing but headlights and the distant red glow of a traffic signal that nobody in Ridgecrest ever obeyed. Somewhere out there, a white van with no plates was parked in the dark. Somewhere out there, a man who had visited a school pretending to be from Child Protective Services was making another phone call. And somewhere 90 miles south, inside an abandoned building that hadn't seen a congregation in almost 2 decades, something was waiting that had been placed there by a girl who disappeared at 11 years old. A girl the system forgot, the police abandoned, and the world filed away as another unsolved number in a cabinet nobody opened. Damon pulled his collar against the wind. 3 days. He wasn't sure Ethan had that long. He wasn't sure any of them did. Inside his pocket, the challenge coin pressed against his chest like a second heartbeat. Steady, insistent, and carrying a message that had taken 20 years to arrive. A message he still didn't fully understand, but someone did. And that someone knew exactly where Damon Cross would go next. Damon didn't sleep. He sat in the garage bay on a metal folding chair with the 2 halves of the challenge coin on the workbench in front of him. The strip of waterproof paper with the GPS coordinates smoothed flat under a socket wrench to keep it from curling. The fluorescent light above him buzzed at a frequency that burrowed into the base of his skull like a dentist's drill. He'd turned off every other light in the building. The darkness beyond the workbench felt alive, thick and patient, pressing against the edges of the fluorescent glow like something waiting to be invited in. His coffee had gone cold for the 3rd time. He didn't bother reheating it. At 2:47 a.m., his phone vibrated. A text from Greaves. 2 words. All quiet. Cedar Lane was dark, no van, no strangers. Just a foster home full of sleeping children and 2 bikers sitting in the cold on the opposite side of the street, engines off, watching. At 4:15 a.m., another text. Bone this time. Shift change. Nothing. Damon stared at the coordinates. 40.1137 degrees. North, 89.2264 degrees west. 90 miles south. An abandoned structure on unincorporated county land. He'd pulled up the satellite image on Pike's phone before the kid left. The resolution was poor. A gray rectangle surrounded by overgrown fields and a dirt access road that connected to a state highway through 2 miles of timber. No neighbors. No cell towers within reliable range. The kind of place people built when they wanted to disappear from the world. Or when they wanted to make other people disappear. He could be there in 90 minutes. Roach had said 3 days. 3 days felt like a coffin with the lid nailed shut. The back door of the clubhouse opened at 5:30 a.m. Ethan stepped into the garage bay wearing the same damp hoodie, his hair pressed flat on one side from the couch cushion. He looked smaller in the early morning light. Thinner. The kind of thin that made Damon's stomach tighten because he recognized it, not from poverty, but from the specific malnutrition that happens when a kid stops eating because the house he lives in doesn't feel safe enough to sit down at a table. "You didn't sleep," Ethan said. "Neither did you." "I slept a little." The kid rubbed his eyes with the heel of his palm. "The lock works. That helped." Damon looked at him. A 14-year-old boy standing in a biker clubhouse at dawn, telling a stranger that a functioning lock on a door was enough to let him close his eyes. The sentence was small. What it carried was enormous. "You hungry?" Damon asked. "I'm fine." "That wasn't what I asked." Ethan hesitated. Then, "Yeah." Damon walked to the small kitchen behind the bar area. The refrigerator held half a carton of eggs, a block of cheddar cheese with one corner going hard, and 3 bottles of hot sauce lined up like ammunition. He cooked 6 eggs scrambled in a cast-iron skillet that was older than Ethan and put them on a paper plate with 2 slices of toast made from bread that was 1 day past its date but still edible. Ethan ate like someone who'd trained himself to finish before the food could be taken away. Fast. Methodical. No wasted motion. He didn't look up until the plate was clean. "Thank you," he said quietly. Damon nodded. He poured 2 cups of fresh coffee, black for himself, half milk, and 3 sugars for the kid, because that's how teenagers drank coffee when they drank it at all. They sat across from each other at the bar in silence. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, but the sky outside the windows was the color of a week-old bruise, gray and yellow and refusing to heal. "I need to ask you something," Damon said, "and I need you to tell me the truth even if it sounds crazy." "Okay." "The man who came to your school, the one who said he was from CPS, what did he look like?" Ethan closed his eyes. Not thinking, remembering, there was a difference. Thinking was searching. Remembering was going back to a place you didn't want to revisit. Tall, maybe 6'1", gray hair but not old, like he went gray early. He wore a blue windbreaker and khaki pants, clean shoes, like really clean. Nobody in Ridgecrest has shoes that clean. White, black. White, tanned though, like he spent time outside, and his hands... Ethan opened his eyes. He had soft hands. I noticed when he reached for the pen at the sign-in desk. No calluses, no scars, nothing. Damon processed that. A man with soft hands and clean shoes asking about a foster kid in a town where neither of those things was normal. Not a local, not someone who worked with his body. Someone from somewhere else, someone who had a reason to be here that had nothing to do with child welfare. "You ever see him again after that day?" "No, but I saw the van again." "When?" 2 days later. Same spot, Birch Street, engine running. Damon set his coffee down. "Ethan, I need you to stay here today. Don't go to school. Don't go back to Cedar Lane, not yet." "My foster mom will call the school." "Let her. She'll call the cops." "The cops in this town can barely find their own patrol cars. You'll be fine here." Ethan looked at him with an expression that was too old for his face. The expression of someone who had learned through experience that the adults who said, "You'll be fine," were usually the ones who disappeared first. "I'm not going anywhere," Damon said. "I promise." "People always promise." "I'm not people." The front door of the clubhouse opened at 7:45 a.m., and the sound that entered wasn't footsteps. It was the specific creak of a prosthetic knee joint that needed oil, a sound every Iron Veil brother recognized the way most people recognize their own mother's voice. Roach. He came in carrying a manila folder thick enough to double as a doorstop. Behind him, Hutch and Pike. Hutch looked like he hadn't slept either. His eyes were red-rimmed and his beard was uncombed, which for Hutch was the equivalent of a civilian showing up to work in pajamas. Pike moved with the contained energy of a younger man running on caffeine and purpose, a laptop bag slung over one shoulder. They gathered in the main room. Ethan stayed at the bar. Damon noticed that Roach glanced at the kid, then at the empty plate, then at Damon, and something in the old man's expression shifted. Not approval exactly, recognition. The recognition that Damon had done the one thing that mattered most before anything else. He'd fed the kid. "Talk to me," Damon said. Roach opened the folder. Hutch pulled surveillance footage from every camera within a mile of this building. Gas station on Route 9. A TM outside the credit union. Traffic camera at the intersection of Main and 4th. He spread 3 printed screenshots across the table. Each one showed the same vehicle. A white panel van, no visible plates, tinted windows, captured at different angles over a 6-day period. Same van, same route, every day between 3:15 and 3:45 p.m. "School lets out at 3:10, Damon said. Exactly. They were timing it with the kids' walk home. They were timing it with the kids' walk past this building. Roach tapped the 3rd screenshot. Look at the trajectory. The van comes from the east on Main, turns south on Gravel Street, and parks within line of sight of our front lot. It's not watching the school. It's watching us. And it's waiting for someone to walk between the two." Damon looked at Ethan. The boy was listening from the bar, his hands wrapped around the coffee cup, his knuckles white. "Pike," Roach said. "What did you find on Hargrove?" Pike set his laptop on the table and opened a browser window. Linda Hargrove, DCFS caseworker. Assigned to downstate foster placements from 1998 to 2011. Transferred to Whitfield County in 2012 after a departmental restructure. At least that's what the paperwork says. But the restructure didn't affect her division. She requested the transfer voluntarily. "Why?" Hutch asked. That's where it gets interesting. In 2011, a state auditor flagged 6 cases in Hargrove's district where foster children were reported as runaways within 90 days of placement. 6 kids. Same reporting pattern. Same boilerplate language in the case notes. Same outcome. Closed files. No follow-up investigation. The room went quiet. "Cassie was one of the 6, Damon said. Not a question." "Cassie was the 4th. Damon stood up. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a blade being drawn. He walked to the window and stood with his back to the room, his hands flat against the sill, his weight forward on his arms like a man bracing against something invisible. 6 kids. Not 1. 6. He had spent 20 years believing his sister's disappearance was an isolated tragedy, a single failure in a broken system, a single girl who fell through a single crack. But it wasn't a crack. It was a hole. A deliberate, engineered hole in the floor of a system designed to catch falling children, and someone had cut it open on purpose. "Who else?" His voice was low, controlled in the way that a power line is controlled, one frayed wire from catastrophic release. "I'm still pulling names," Pike said. "The records are buried. Some of them have been reclassified. Some of the files were damaged in a records facility fire in 2014. "Convenient," Hutch muttered. "Hargrove died in 2019, Pike continued. Officially, heart failure. She was 57, lived alone in a rental outside Whitfield. No family, no will. Her landlord cleaned out the property 2 weeks after she died and donated everything to a thrift store." "Everything?" Roach asked. "That's what the landlord told the county, but I found something else." Pike turned the laptop screen toward the group. "Hargrove had a storage unit, paid 3 years in advance through an LLC registered to a name that doesn't appear in any other state database. The unit is in Carlisle, about 40 miles west of the coordinates inside that coin." Damon turned from the window. "You're saying she kept records off-site?" "I'm saying she kept something off-site. Whether it's records, evidence, or a box of Christmas decorations, I can't tell you until someone opens it. Damon looked at Roach. That's less than an hour from the church coordinates. I know what you're about to say. Then you know I'm right. We ride south. We hit the storage unit first. Whatever Hargrove kept there tells us what's waiting at those coordinates. 2 stops. 1 day. No. The word landed between them like a dropped anvil. Damon's jaw clenched. Roach. I said no. I heard what you said. Then hear why. Roach planted his cane on the floor and stood. The prosthetic leg clicked as he shifted his weight, a sound that always reminded the room that this man had left a piece of himself in a jungle 50 years ago and never once asked for it back. You want to ride 90 miles into unknown territory based on coordinates hidden inside a coin that someone planted under your bike to manipulate you into doing exactly what you're about to do. That doesn't strike you as a problem? Everything about this is a problem. That doesn't mean we sit here. It means we don't walk into a trap on their timeline. It's been 20 years, Roach. 20 years of their timeline. Every day we wait is another day they've had to move, to bury, to burn. And every day you've survived is because you didn't ride blind into something you didn't understand. Roach's voice didn't rise, it dropped, the way a threat drops when it's real. I've watched you carry this for 2 decades, brother. I've watched you drink yourself to the edge and pull back. I've watched you pick fights with men twice your size because you needed someone to hit you hard enough to make you feel something other than guilt. I've watched you sit in this garage at 3 a.m. night after night staring at a photograph of a little girl who deserved better than what the world gave her. I have watched every single night. The room was so quiet, Damon could hear Ethan breathing at the bar. Don't you dare tell me I don't understand urgency, Roach said. I buried 6 men in my platoon because our lieutenant understood urgency better than he understood patience. Urgency is what gets people killed when the enemy already knows you're coming. Damon's hands were fists at his sides, not aimed at Roach, aimed at the wall, the floor, the 20 years of accumulated helplessness compressed into 2 knots of bone and tendon. 2 days, Damon said through his teeth. Not 3. 2. Roach studied him. The silence lasted long enough for the coffee maker in the kitchen to click off. 2 days, Roach agreed. But we do this my way. Reconnaissance first. Intel before action. And nobody rides alone. Hutch cleared his throat. There's something else. Every head turned. Hutch pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. He unfolded it slowly, deliberately, with the care of a man handling something that might cut him. I pulled a property record search on that church, the one at the GPS coordinates. It was sold in 2008 to an LLC called Cornerstone Youth Services. Youth Services, Pike repeated. That's the name on the deed. But the LLC is registered in Delaware through a shell structure that I can't trace from here. What I can trace is this. Cornerstone Youth Services also holds the lease on 3 other properties in the same county. A warehouse, a residential property, and a commercial building currently listed as a furniture restoration business. Furniture restoration, Damon said flatly, with a loading dock, a commercial vehicle fleet, and operating hours listed as by appointment only. Hutch set the paper on the table. The furniture business has been in operation since 2009, 1 year after they bought the church. It runs 2 box trucks and a panel van. White? Damon asked. I don't have color confirmation, but the fleet registration shows 3 vehicles, 2 heavy trucks, 1 light cargo van. Damon looked at Ethan. The boy's face had gone pale. Not the pale of fear, the pale of understanding. The specific shade that happens when the worst thing you imagine turns out to be smaller than the truth. They've been operating for 17 years, Damon said, right under the surface, using a business as cover, using shell companies to hold property, using caseworkers to supply. He stopped himself, not because he couldn't say it, because Ethan was in the room, and some words, once spoken in front of a child, couldn't be taken back. Pike, Damon said, I need you to cross-reference the 6 cases Hargrove flagged with any missing persons reports filed in the counties where Cornerstone holds property. That could take days. You have 2. Pike nodded and started typing. Damon pulled Roach aside near the garage bay door. The morning air was cold and still carried the smell of last night's rain, wet asphalt and dead leaves, and the distant industrial sweetness from the grain elevator 2 miles north. Their breath came out in thin white clouds that dissolved before reaching each other. "I need to ask you something," Damon said, his voice low enough that only Roach could hear. "And I need you to not lie to me. When have I ever?" "Did you know about the 6 cases before Pike found them?" Roach's expression didn't change, but his hand tightened on his cane. A micro-movement, the kind of tell that only people who've spent years reading body language in combat zones would catch. "I suspected," Roach said. Damon felt something inside his chest go very still, the kind of still that precedes an earthquake. "Suspected how?" "In 2014, a man came to this clubhouse. Before your time as a patched member, you were still riding solo. He said he was a private investigator working a missing child case in a county south of here. He asked questions about local foster placements, about DCFS oversight, about whether we'd seen anything unusual." "What did you tell him?" "I told him what I knew, which was nothing. He left his card. I kept it." Roach paused. 3 weeks later, I called the number. It was disconnected. I looked into him. The name on his card, David Renner, didn't match any licensed PI in the state of Illinois. "You never told me this." "You were in no condition to hear it. You were drinking a fifth of bourbon a day and sleeping in the garage with a loaded .45 under your pillow. If I'd given you a thread to pull, you would have pulled it until it wrapped around your neck." The words hit Damon like a fist to the sternum, not because they were cruel, because they were true, because he remembered 2014, the year he'd blacked out on the highway doing 90 and woke up in a ditch with a broken collarbone and no memory of how he got there. The year Roach had taken his keys and his weapon and sat with him for 3 days straight in the back room until the shaking stopped. "You should have told me after," Damon said. "After what? After you got sober? After you started functioning? After you found a reason to keep breathing that wasn't just revenge?" Roach's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. Not tears, the kind of moisture that collects behind a man's eyes when he's holding something too heavy to set down and too sharp to keep holding. "There was never a right time, Damon. There was never a version of this where I hand you that information and you don't destroy yourself trying to use it. That wasn't your call to make. Yes, it was. That's exactly what it was. Because you're my brother, and brothers don't hand each other loaded weapons when they're standing on the edge of a roof." Damon turned away. His boots scraped on the wet concrete. He walked 3 steps toward his motorcycle, stopped, and stood with his hands on the handlebars, his head down, his breath coming in short, ragged pulls that fogged the chrome of the speedometer. He wanted to be angry. Part of him was. A deep structural anger that lived in the foundation of who he was, the kind that doesn't burn hot, but stays cold, permanent, woven into the load-bearing walls of a man's identity. Roach had kept something from him. Roach had made a decision about Damon's own life, his own sister, his own pain, without asking. But standing there in the cold morning air with his hands on the bike his sister would never ride, Damon understood something he didn't want to understand. Roach had been right. In 2014, that thread would have killed him. He released the handlebars and walked back to where Roach was standing. "The PI," Damon said. "David Renner. The card. You still have it?" "In my office. Top drawer." "Get it." Roach studied him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked inside, the rhythm of his cane and prosthetic leg marking a cadence that every Iron Veil brother knew as well as their own heartbeat. Inside the clubhouse, Pike was still typing. Hutch was on the phone, his voice low, talking to someone about commercial vehicle registrations. Ethan sat at the bar with his hands wrapped around an empty coffee cup, staring at nothing. Damon sat down next to him. "You okay?" "Not really." "Good answer. Honest answers are the only ones worth giving in here." Ethan looked at him. "The van they're talking about, the white one from the furniture company. It's the same van, isn't it? The one outside my school." Damon didn't answer immediately. He could lie. He could soften it. He could give the kid a version of the truth that had the sharp edges filed down, the way adults always did when they thought protection meant deception. He didn't. "Probably," Damon said. Ethan nodded slowly. "And the man at my school?" The one with the clean shoes. We're going to find out who he is. What if he comes back before you find out? He won't get to you. How do you know? Damon reached into his jacket and pulled out the reassembled challenge coin. He held it where Ethan could see the eagle, scratched, imperfect, carried across 20 years and through the hands of at least 2 people who had tried to use it as a lifeline. Because the last person who carried this coin was an 11-year-old girl who nobody protected, Damon said. And I've spent 20 years becoming the kind of man who makes sure that never happens to anyone else. Ethan looked at the coin, then at Damon, then at the room full of bikers working phones and laptops and surveillance footage, men who smelled like leather and motor oil and cold air, men whose hands were scarred and whose eyes were tired but whose attention was absolute, total, undivided. Okay, Ethan said quietly. It was enough. The rest of the day passed in controlled chaos. Pike's cross-reference produced 4 names. 4 children reported as runaways from foster placements in counties where Cornerstone Youth Services held property. 3 of the 4 had never been found. The 4th had been located in 2016, deceased, in circumstances that local authorities classified as accidental, but that the coroner's notes described with language that suggested otherwise. Hutch confirmed the commercial vehicle fleet. 2 box trucks and 1 panel van, registered to the furniture business, insured through a policy that listed a post office box as the business address. No photographs. No employee records accessible through public databases. Roach returned with the business card. David Renner, Private Investigations. A phone number. A P.O. box in Springfield. Nothing else. No website. No licensing information. No state registration. Pike ran the name through every database he could access. Nothing. David Renner didn't exist. Not as a licensed PI. Not as a registered voter. Not as a holder of a state driver's license. The name was a ghost. A label attached to a man who had walked into the Iron Vale Clubhouse 9 years ago, asked questions nobody was ready to answer, and dissolved back into the dark. But the P.O. box was real. Pike traced it to a mail forwarding service in Springfield that had been operating since 2010. The account associated with the box had been prepaid through 2025. Someone was still expecting mail. By nightfall, the clubhouse smelled like stale coffee, cigarette smoke, and the particular brand of tension that accumulates when a group of men realize they're standing at the edge of something much larger than any of them anticipated. Damon sat at the table staring at the 4 names Pike had found. 4 children. 4 files. 4 lives reduced to paperwork and closed cases, and the particular bureaucratic silence that descends when a system decides that looking away is easier than looking deeper. His phone rang at 9:17 p.m. Greaves. Damon, we've got movement. His blood went cold. Cedar Lane? No, the clubhouse, east side parking lot. A car just pulled in, sat for 30 seconds with the lights off, then pulled out. Dark sedan, couldn't make the plate. How long ago? 2 minutes. Damon was on his feet before the call ended. He grabbed his jacket, moved through the main room, and hit the side door at a pace that made Hutch stand up from his chair. What? Hutch said. Someone just drove through our lot. The night air hit him like a wall of cold glass. The parking lot was empty, just bikes and the rusted pickup and the wet asphalt reflecting the orange glow of the single working streetlight on the corner. No sedan, no headlights, just the dark and the cold and the sound of his own breathing. He stood there for 60 seconds, 90, 2 minutes, nothing. He walked back inside and found Roach standing in the hallway with his cane in one hand and a cell phone in the other. They're probing, Roach said, testing response times, seeing how fast we react, or confirming we're all here. The 2 men looked at each other. If they know we're here, Damon said slowly, they know Ethan is here. Roach's jaw set. Where's the kid? Back room. Damon moved down the hall and knocked twice on the back room door. The lock clicked. Ethan's face appeared in the gap. Wide eyes, sleep-creased cheek, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. Stay inside, Damon said. Keep the lock on. Don't open this door for anyone but me. What's happening? Nothing you need to worry about. Ethan's eyes said he didn't believe that, but he closed the door. The lock clicked again. Damon returned to the main room. Roach, Hutch, and Pike were standing around the table. The four names on Pike's printout stared up from the surface like accusations. "We can't wait 2 days," Damon said. Roach opened his mouth to argue. "Listen to me," Damon continued, and his voice carried a weight that made even Roach pause. "They probed the lot. They've been watching our clubhouse for weeks. They planted the coin because they knew I'd start digging, and now they know the kid is inside this building. Every hour we wait is an hour they use to figure out exactly how to take him. And every hour we rush is an hour they use to lead us into exactly where they want us," Roach said. "Then we split." It was Hutch. Both men turned to look at him. He stood with his arms crossed, his red-rimmed eyes steady. "Half the club stays here, protects the kid, watches the perimeter, the other half rides south at dawn, hits the storage unit, gets in, gets whatever's inside, gets out." Roach looked at Damon. Damon looked at Roach. "Dawn," Roach said finally. "Not before. And you take Pike, Hutch, and 2 prospects. I stay here with Greaves and Bone and the kid. Roach, you need me more here than there, and you know it. Nobody gets through that front door while I'm standing behind it. Not a sedan, not a van, not an army." Damon wanted to argue, but when he looked at the old man, standing on a leg that wasn't his, holding a cane he'd never asked for, with eyes that had been watching over damaged men for longer than some of them had been alive, he understood that this was not negotiable. "Dawn," Damon said. He walked back to the garage bay. The workbench light was still on. The 2 halves of the challenge coin sat where he'd left them, the eagles staring up at the ceiling with the blind patience of something that had been waiting far longer than any of them. He picked up the strip of waterproof paper again. The GPS coordinates. The abandoned church. Whatever was there. Then he turned the paper over. He hadn't looked at the back before. There had been no reason to. The coordinates were on the front, written in clear block letters. But on the back, barely visible, pressed into the paper with a ballpoint pen that had nearly run dry, were 2 words he almost missed. 2 words that changed everything. "Forgive me." The handwriting was small, cramped, feminine. Damon's hand went to the edge of the workbench to steady himself. He knew that handwriting. He had seen it 1,000 times. On grocery lists taped to the refrigerator in their father's apartment, on birthday cards made from folded construction paper, on the margins of school books where she doodled horses and eagles and the initials of a family that was always falling apart. Cassie. His sister had written these coordinates. His sister had hidden this message inside the coin that their father gave her. And his sister had written 2 words on the back that meant she knew, wherever she was, whatever had happened to her, that the truth she was leaving behind would hurt him in ways she couldn't prevent. "Forgive me." Damon set the paper down, his vision blurred. His hands gripped the edge of the workbench hard enough to whiten the wood under his fingers. A sound came out of him. Not a word, not a cry. Something lower, something involuntary. The sound a structure makes when the weight it's carrying finally exceeds what it was built to hold. She had been alive. At some point after her disappearance, Cassie Cross had been alive long enough to write coordinates, to hide a message, to plan for the possibility that someone might find this coin and follow it to wherever it led. She had been alive, and she had not come home. That meant one of 2 things. She couldn't, or she chose not to. And either answer was a devastation that Damon had no framework to survive. Down the hall, behind a locked door, a 14-year-old boy sat on a couch wrapped in a blanket, trusting a group of strangers to keep him safe from the same darkness that had swallowed a girl 20 years ago. Outside in the cold, a dark sedan had already confirmed what the people behind the white van needed to know. The bikers were all in one place. The boy was with them. And Damon Cross was about to ride exactly where the coordinates told him to go. Everything was proceeding according to plan, just not Damon's plan. Dawn didn't arrive. It bled through the sky like a wound that refused to clot. Thin, gray, the color of dishwater left standing overnight. The temperature had dropped below freezing sometime around 4 a.m., and the puddles in the parking lot had skinned over with ice that cracked under Damon's boots like brittle bone when he walked to his motorcycle at 5:47 a.m. He hadn't shown anyone the back of the paper. "Forgive me." 2 words in his sister's handwriting, pressed into waterproof paper with a dying pen, hidden inside a hollowed-out challenge coin that had crossed 20 years and God knows how many hands before landing under the front tire of his Harley. He'd stared at those two words for the rest of the night while the clubhouse slept around him, Ethan locked in the back room, Roach dozing in his office chair with his cane across his lap, Pike passed out on the floor next to his laptop with the screen still glowing. Forgive me. Not help me. Not save me. Not find me. Forgive me. Damon had folded the paper back into the coin and sealed it shut and put it in his jacket pocket next to his chest, where the brass sat against his ribs like a tumor he couldn't excise. He understood what those words implied. He understood that his sister had, at some point after her disappearance, made a choice, or been forced into a position that felt like a choice, that she believed required his forgiveness. And he understood that whatever he found at those coordinates, or inside that storage unit, was going to be something that would rearrange the architecture of his grief in ways he couldn't predict. He started the engine. The Harley coughed twice, then caught, a deep rolling thunder that shook the handlebars and vibrated up through his spine. Behind him, 3 more engines fired in sequence. Hutch on his Road King, Pike on a Sportster that was too small for him but ran like a scalded dog. 2 prospects, a quiet former Army medic named Sutter and a wiry electrician called Dex who had joined the club 8 months ago and had barely spoken 15 sentences in that time. 5 bikes, 5 men. 90 miles of frozen highway between them and whatever Cassie Cross had left behind. Roach stood in the clubhouse doorway watching them pull out. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He stood there with his cane planted and his jaw set and his pale eyes tracking them until the last taillight disappeared around the corner of Gravel Street. Then he closed the door, locked it, and went to check on the boy. The ride south took an hour and 40 minutes. The roads were empty, 2-lane state highways cutting through flat agricultural land that had already been harvested and plowed under for winter. Frozen stubble stretched to the horizon in every direction, broken only by grain elevators and electrical towers and the occasional farmhouse set so far back from the road it looked like a toy left in a field. The wind was brutal. It came from the northwest in sustained gusts that hit the bike's broadside and required constant correction, the kind of riding that exhausted the shoulders and forearms within 20 minutes and turned the last hour into an endurance test. Nobody spoke. The intercom system stayed off. Each man rode inside his own silence, his own cold, his own version of what they might find at the end of this road. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of Carlisle, a town even smaller than Ridgecrest, population maybe 800, centered around a grain co-op and a post office and a tavern that opened at 10 a.m. and closed whenever the last customer fell off his stool. The facility itself was a row of corrugated metal units behind a chain-link fence with a keypad gate. No attendant. No security cameras that Damon could see, just rust and gravel and the kind of neglect that suggested the owner had stopped caring about the property years ago. Pike had the unit number, 14C, paid through an LLC called Meridian Services Group, the same shell structure that connected to Cornerstone Youth Services through 3 layers of corporate filings. They parked outside the fence. Damon killed his engine and sat for a moment, listening. Wind. The distant hum of power lines. A dog barking somewhere far away. Nothing else. No vehicles. No movement. No sign that anyone had been here recently. Hutch, Dex, watch the road. Anything moves, I want to know before it gets within a quarter mile. Hutch and Dex positioned themselves at opposite ends of the facility's access road. 2 men on motorcycles with clear sight lines in both directions, invisible from the highway but able to see anything approaching long before it arrived. Damon, Pike, and Sutter walked to Unit 14C. The lock was a heavy-duty padlock, commercial grade, the kind that cost $60 and resisted bolt cutters. Sutter pulled a small leather roll from his saddlebag and knelt in front of the lock. Former Army medics learned a lot of skills that didn't appear on their discharge paperwork. The lock opened in 90 seconds. Damon pulled the rolling door up. The metal screamed against its tracks, a sound like an animal being woken from a sleep it didn't want to leave. Inside, the unit was dark, cold. The air smelled like cardboard and mildew and something chemical, Toner, maybe. Or the preservative smell of old photographic film. Pike hit the flashlight on his phone. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a wall of cardboard boxes stacked 5 high and 3 deep, filling the unit from floor to ceiling. Each box was labeled with a black marker in handwriting that was precise and small and slightly shaky, the handwriting of someone writing quickly, under pressure, over a long period of time. Foster placements 2001 to 2004. Transfer records Whitfield County. Correspondence CYS. Vehicle logs 2010 to 2015. Photographs. Do not destroy. Linda Hargrove hadn't just kept records. She had built an archive. Damon stepped inside. His boots crunched on a layer of grit and dead insects on the concrete floor. He pulled the nearest box from the stack, Correspondence, CYS, and set it on the ground. The cardboard was soft with age, but the contents inside were sealed in gallon-sized plastic bags, each one labeled with a date and a reference number. He opened the first bag. Letters. Dozens of them. Typed on letterhead from Cornerstone Youth Services and addressed to Linda Hargrove at her home address. Business communications on the surface, updates on facility renovations, staffing changes, scheduling adjustments. But the language was wrong. Damon read 3 of them and felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. Delivery confirmed for Unit 7. Transit window 48 hours. Receiving party confirms availability. Unit 12 transfer complete. Documentation attached. Please update placement file accordingly and close within standard window. New intake pending. ETA Friday. Please prepare receiving paperwork under standard protocol. Age bracket 9 to 13. Unit, transit, intake, receiving, age bracket. They weren't talking about furniture. Pike was reading over his shoulder. The younger man's face had gone the color of old concrete. His breathing was shallow and too fast. How many boxes? Pike asked. I count 26. We can't take all of them. We're not leaving any of them. Damon pulled out his phone and called Hutch. Bring the bikes to the unit. We need saddlebags, every bungee cord, and whatever cargo straps you've got. We're loading everything. It took 40 minutes. They emptied the unit box by box, prioritizing the sealed evidence bags, and the boxes labeled photographs. Do not destroy. The 5 motorcycles were loaded beyond what was safe or reasonable. Boxes strapped to passenger seats, bags wedged into saddlebags, the overflow distributed across 3 bikes with cargo nets that Pike had brought in his pack. They looked like a convoy of men moving everything they owned across a war zone. Damon was loading the last box when his hand hit something at the back of the unit that wasn't cardboard. Metal. Flat. Bolted to the wall at knee height. A small fireproof safe, the kind sold at office supply stores for important documents. It was locked with a 4-digit combination. He tried 0000. Nothing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Nothing. He stared at the dial. 4 digits. Linda Hargrove had prepaid this unit for years through a shell company. She'd built an evidence archive spanning more than a decade. She wasn't careless. The combination would mean something. He tried a date. 2004, the year Cassie disappeared. The dial turned. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single manila envelope, thicker than the others, sealed with packing tape. On the front, in Hargrove's handwriting, for law enforcement only. In the event of my death. Damon's hands were steady when he opened it. His mind was not. The envelope contained 3 things. The first was a typed letter, 2 pages, single-spaced. It began, "My name is Linda Hargrove. I am writing this letter because I believe I will be killed before I can testify to what I have witnessed." The letter described in clinical detail a network that had operated for over a decade using foster care placements as a pipeline for trafficking children across state lines. It named Cornerstone Youth Services as the operational hub. It described how caseworkers were recruited, some through bribery, some through blackmail, some through threats against their own families. It described the process. Children placed in compliant foster homes, reported as runaways after a waiting period, then transported through commercial vehicles to receiving locations in other states. It named names. Damon read each one. His vision narrowed until the letters on the page were the only things that existed. 3. DCFFS supervisors, a juvenile court clerk, 2 foster parents, a transportation coordinator, and at the top, the name that appeared more than any other, circled twice in blue ink with a single note beside it. He controls everything. Raymond Deschler. The name meant nothing to Damon. He'd never heard it, never seen it in any of the records he'd pulled over 20 years of searching. It was a name that had existed in a shadow so complete that even the woman who documented it believed she would die before it came to light. The second item in the envelope was a photograph, black and white, printed on matte paper. It showed a group of men standing outside a commercial building, a loading dock, a box truck, a hand-painted sign on the wall behind them that read Deschler and Sons Fine Furniture Restoration. 5 men. Business casual, smiling. A company photograph. The kind you'd frame and hang in a lobby. Damon studied each face. He didn't recognize any of them. Then he looked at the background. Behind the group, partially obscured by the box truck, was a 6th figure. Not posing, not smiling. Standing apart from the group with a clipboard in hand, wearing a blue windbreaker and khaki pants. Clean shoes, gray hair, soft hands. Damon's blood pressure spiked so hard his ears rang. The man in the background was the same man Ethan had described. The man who had walked into a school in Ridgecrest, claimed to be from CPS, asked about a foster kid, and walked out with the calm efficiency of someone executing a checklist. He turned the photograph over. On the back, in Hargrove's handwriting, taken 2016, Carlisle facility, man in background unidentified, believed to be field recruiter. Field recruiter. A man whose job was to identify, approach, and assess children. And he had been at Ethan's school 5 days ago. The third item in the envelope stopped Damon's breathing. It was another photograph, smaller, color, faded, torn along one edge as if it had been ripped from a larger image. A young woman, early 20s, thin, standing in front of the same loading dock as the first photograph, but at night. The lighting was poor, a single floodlight casting hard shadows across her face. She wore a dark jacket, and her hair was pulled back, and her expression was something Damon had never seen on a human face before. Not fear, not resignation, something beyond both. The look of someone who has accepted that they are inside a machine that will eventually destroy them and has decided to document its operation rather than escape it. In her hand, barely visible in the photograph's shadow, was a brass object the size of a $50. The challenge coin. Damon's legs gave out. He didn't fall. He went down to one knee on the concrete floor of the storage unit, the photograph in his hand, his other hand braced against the wall. And the sound that came out of him was not a word. It was the sound of a man whose skeleton has just been pulled out through his chest, structural, involuntary, the noise that precedes either total collapse or the kind of reconstruction that requires a person to become someone entirely different from who they were 30 seconds ago. Cassie. The girl in the photograph was Cassie, not 11 years old, not the child in the faded picture from the foster home. A woman, grown, alive, at least when this photograph was taken. Standing in front of the building that served as the operational center for the network that had swallowed her, holding the coin their father had given her, staring directly into the camera with eyes that carried 20 years of something worse than captivity. She had been inside the machine. She hadn't escaped. She had stayed. Pike knelt beside him. Damon, talk to me. Damon held up the photograph. Pike took it, looked at Damon. The younger man's jaw flexed once, hard, and he turned away for a moment, facing the back wall of the storage unit, his hand on the top of his head, his breathing deliberate and controlled the way soldiers breathe when they're trying not to lose it in front of someone who needs them to hold. Is that her? Pike asked without turning around. Yes. When was this taken? Damon turned the photograph over. On the back, in different handwriting, not Hargrove's, smaller, cramped, the same handwriting from the waterproof paper, a date, 2019, and beneath it 3 words, I'm still here, 2019, 5 years ago. His sister had been alive 5 years ago, standing in front of the building that had taken her, holding the coin that was supposed to be lost forever, writing messages on the backs of photographs in handwriting that Damon would have recognized from across a room. She hadn't run. She hadn't escaped. She hadn't called him or found him or reached out through any of the channels he'd left open for 20 years. The P.O. box he'd maintained, the email address he'd never changed, the missing persons listing he'd renewed every single year. She had stayed inside the network. "Forgive me." The words on the waterproof paper hit him again with the force of a revelation he wasn't equipped to survive. She wasn't asking forgiveness for disappearing. She was asking forgiveness for staying, for choosing, or being forced into the impossible position of choosing, to remain inside the operation rather than escape it. Why? Because she was gathering evidence. The realization hit Damon with the precision of a rifle round entering center mass. Hargrove's archive, the photographs, the correspondence, the detailed records that no external investigator could have compiled without access to the organization's internal operations. Cassie hadn't been a victim trapped inside a machine. She had become the machine's memory. Recording, documenting, hiding evidence in storage units and challenge coins and waterproof paper for the day when someone might find it and use it to tear the whole thing down. She had sacrificed her own life, her freedom, her identity, her chance at a normal existence, to build a case against the people who had taken her, and she had done it alone, for 20 years. "We need to go." It was Hutch, standing at the entrance to the unit, his phone pressed to his ear. His face was tight. "Now, Greaves just called. There's a problem at the clubhouse." Damon stood. His knee ached. His hands were numb. The photograph went into his jacket pocket next to the coin. "What kind of problem?" Hutch's expression was the kind that men wear when they're about to deliver information that will make everything worse. "A woman showed up at the front door 20 minutes ago, asked for you by name. She told Roach she's a federal investigator. She has credentials, and she says if we don't hand over everything we found in this storage unit within the next 2 hours, she'll arrest every patched member of the Iron Veil for obstruction, evidence tampering, and interfering with an active federal case." "What federal case?" "That's the thing. Roach asked her. She wouldn't say, but she knew about the storage unit. She knew the unit number. She knew we were coming here today." The air in the storage unit went thin. Damon looked at Pike. Pike looked at Hutch. The three men stood in a triangle of silence while the implications arranged themselves into a pattern that none of them wanted to see. Someone inside their circle had communicated their plans. "Who knew we were coming here, ta?" Damon asked. His voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that precedes demolition. "Everyone in the clubhouse last night," Hutch said. "That's 6 brothers and Ethan. And Roach. Don't. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm stating facts. 6 brothers, 1 civilian kid, and Roach. Those are the only people who knew about this location." Damon pulled out his phone, called Roach. It rang 4 times before the old man answered. "I know," Roach said before Damon could speak. "She's sitting in my office right now. Her name is Agent Corinne Vasquez. Her credentials check out. I had Pike's contact at the VA verify them while she was drinking my coffee. She's DEA, not FBI. And Damon, she's nervous. Federal agents don't get nervous unless they're operating outside their own chain of command. She knew we were here. She knew more than that. She knew about the coin. She knew about the coordinates. She knew Hargrove's name. And she said something that I need you to hear before you walk through that door. Say it." A pause. The sound of Roach breathing through damaged lungs. The faint creak of his cane shifting on the floor. "She says Cassie is dead, Damon. She says your sister was murdered 8 months ago. And she says the people who killed her know you have the coin and they're coming for the boy next." The phone stayed pressed to his ear, but the words had already stopped meaning what words normally mean. They became sounds, vibrations, physical objects hitting the interior of his skull and bouncing off surfaces that had been built specifically to absorb this kind of impact. Cassie is dead. 8 months. Murdered. He had been looking at a photograph of his sister alive 5 years ago, standing in front of a loading dock, holding a coin, writing, "I'm still here" on the back of a picture she believed might be the last record of her existence. And 8 months ago, someone had ended that existence, while Damon was in his garage, drinking cold coffee, staring at the ceiling, not knowing she had been alive at all. "Damon?" Roach's voice came through the phone like a hand reaching into dark water. "Come home. Now. Bring everything." The line went dead. Damon looked at the empty storage unit, the concrete floor, the bolts where the safe had been mounted, the dust outlines where 26 boxes of evidence had sat for years, waiting. "Mount up," he said. The word came out flat, mechanical, the voice of a man who had just passed through the membrane that separates grief from operational necessity, the place where emotion doesn't disappear but gets compressed into something dense and cold and weaponized. Marines knew that place. Veterans knew it. Men who had watched friends die in real time and then continued the mission because the mission was the only thing left that made the dying mean anything. 5 engines roared to life in the frozen morning air. The ride back to Ridgecrest was faster than the ride out. 83 minutes of highway consumed at speeds that turned the wind into a blade and the cold into something that bypassed clothing entirely and went straight into the marrow. Damon rode at the front, his hands on the grips, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead with the tunnel vision of a man who could only process 1 mile at a time because processing more than that would collapse the fragile scaffolding holding him vertical on the bike. Cassie was dead. Cassie had been alive. Cassie had spent 20 years inside the organization that took her, building a case, gathering evidence, hiding breadcrumbs and coins and photographs and storage units paid through shell companies. And someone had found her. And someone had killed her. And someone had then taken the coin she'd hidden, the coin containing the GPS coordinates and the words "forgive me," and placed it under Damon's motorcycle. Not as a threat, as delivery. Her final message had been mailed by her murderer. The clubhouse appeared through the morning haze like a bunker emerging from fog. Damon pulled into the lot and killed the engine and was off the bike before the kickstand was fully down. He crossed the gravel in 6 strides, hit the front door, and walked into a room that had rearranged itself into a configuration he didn't recognize. Roach stood behind the bar, his cane resting against the counter, his arms crossed. Greaves and Bone flanked the hallway entrance. Ethan was nowhere visible, still in the back room, Damon assumed. And sitting in a wooden chair in the center of the main room, with a paper cup of coffee in her hands and a manila folder on her lap, was a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in 72 hours. Agent Corinne Vasquez. Late 30s, dark hair pulled back tight, a navy blazer over a white shirt that had been pressed at some point but had since lost the argument with gravity and exhaustion. No jewelry except a watch with a cracked crystal. Her eyes were brown and sharp and moved across the room with the systematic precision of someone cataloging exits, threats, and allies in the first 3 seconds of entering any space. She looked at Damon. "You're cross. And you're in my clubhouse. I'm aware." "Then you're aware you weren't invited. I don't need an invitation. I need the contents of Storage Unit 14C in Carlisle before the people who killed your sister find out you have them." The room went airless. Damon didn't sit. He stood 6 feet from Vasquez with his arms at his sides and his jacket still zipped to the collar and the weight of the challenge coin pressing against his ribs. "How do you know about my sister?" "Because I've been investigating the same network for 3 years. Because your sister was my primary source for 14 months before she was killed. And because everything she built, every document, every photograph, every record in that storage unit was supposed to come to me, not to you." Damon felt Roach's eyes on him. He didn't look. "She contacted you," Damon said. Not a question. "She contacted my office through an anonymous tip line in 2021. She provided enough preliminary evidence to open a federal investigation into Cornerstone Youth Services and its affiliated entities. She was assigned a handler. That handler was me." Vasquez set the coffee cup on the floor beside her chair. Her hands were steady, but her voice carried a micro-tremor that betrayed the control she was working to maintain. "For 14 months, your sister fed me information from inside the organization. Names, dates, transportation routes, receiving locations in 4 states. She was the most disciplined, most methodical, confidential informant I have ever worked with. She never broke protocol. She never missed a scheduled contact. She never once asked for extraction." "Why not?" because she believed that if she left, the network would scatter and rebuild somewhere else under different names. She wanted every piece, every connection, every person, from the top to the bottom. She wanted it airtight. And you let her stay inside. I didn't let her do anything. I begged her to come out. Every contact, every exchange, I told her we had enough to move. She refused. She said, Vasquez paused. The micro-tremor got worse. She said she'd already lost everything worth living for the day they took her, and the only thing left that mattered was making sure they couldn't do it to anyone else. The silence that followed was so complete that Damon could hear the ice cracking in the puddles outside. 8 months ago, Vasquez continued, she missed a scheduled contact, first time in 14 months. I activated recovery protocols. By the time we located her, another pause, longer. She had been killed, made to look like a drug overdose in a motel outside Whitfield. Local police didn't investigate. The coroner signed off. Case closed in 48 hours. Who killed her? Raymond Deschler. The name from Hargrove's letter. The name circled twice in blue ink. He controls everything. Or someone acting on his orders, Vasquez added. Deschler doesn't do his own work. He hasn't for years. He has people. The man at your boy's school, the one with the gray hair and clean shoes, his name is Martin Fell. He's Deschler's field coordinator. He identifies targets, assesses vulnerability, manages logistics. He's been operating in this region for at least a decade. And you haven't arrested him. I can't. Why not? Vasquez looked at him with an expression that contained something Damon recognized. Not fear. Not weakness. The specific helpless fury of a person who knows exactly where the monster is and cannot get permission to open the door. Because my investigation was shut down 6 weeks ago. My supervisors received pressure from, I don't know where, political channels, legal channels, someone with enough influence to make a 3-year federal investigation disappear from the active caseload overnight. I was reassigned, my files were sealed, my access to the evidence database was revoked. So you're here off the books. I'm here because your sister died trying to bring these people down, and I will not let that be for nothing. Vasquez's voice cracked on the last word. She caught it, pulled it back, rebuilt the wall. The evidence in that storage unit is the only copy that exists outside federal custody. Your sister built a duplicate archive specifically because she didn't trust the system to protect it. She was right. The system failed her. Again. Damon looked at Roach. The old man's face was unreadable. His pale eyes moved between Damon and Vasquez with the patience of someone waiting for all the pieces to land before deciding which ones to pick up. How did you know we were going to the storage unit today? Damon asked. Because I've had the unit under surveillance for 2 years. Motion sensors on the access road, camera on the fence. When your bikes triggered the perimeter this morning, I drove here. From where? Springfield. I've been living out of a motel for 3 weeks. Alone? Completely. Damon processed that. A federal agent operating outside her chain of command, living in a motel, running a dead investigation on her own time, driving 90 miles on a motion alert to reach a biker clubhouse before the people who killed his sister could reach the evidence first. She was either telling the truth, or she was the most sophisticated liar he had ever encountered. Roach, Damon said without turning his head. You're Reed. The old man was quiet for 4 seconds. Then, she's telling the truth. Or close enough to it that the parts she's leaving out aren't the parts that matter right now. Vasquez looked at Roach with something that might have been gratitude. Then she turned back to Damon. There's something else, she said. And you need to hear it now because we're running out of time. Say it. Martin Fell was seen in Ridgecrest yesterday. Not at the school, at the county courthouse. He filed a petition with family court requesting emergency custody transfer of a minor currently in foster care on Cedar Lane. The words hit the room like a flashbang. He's trying to take Ethan through the system, Damon said. He's not trying. The hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., and based on the documentation he filed, fabricated home study, forged agency credentials, a letter of recommendation from a DCFS supervisor who's been dead for 2 years, he's going to win. Because the judge who handles family court in this county has never denied an emergency custody petition in his career, not once, in 14 years. Damon's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles went white from knuckle to wrist. "They're not coming for Ethan with a van," Vasquez said. "They're coming for him with a court order. And by this time tomorrow, they'll have legal authority to walk him out of any foster home, any school, any building in this county, including this one." Down the hall, behind a locked door, a 14-year-old boy sat wrapped in a blanket on a couch, trusting that the men on the other side of the wall could keep him safe. He didn't know that the same system that had failed to protect him his entire life was now being weaponized to deliver him directly into the hands of the people who had killed a woman for trying to stop exactly this. And he didn't know that in less than 24 hours, a judge would sign a piece of paper that made it legal. Damon looked at the hallway, then at Vasquez, then at Roach. "Then we have until 9 a.m. tomorrow," Damon said, "to burn this entire network to the ground." Roach straightened behind the bar. His cane clicked against the floor once, a sound like a rifle bolt sliding home. "No," the old man said. "We have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to make sure that when that judge opens his mouth, the only words that come out are the ones we put there." The room held its breath, and somewhere in Ridgecrest, a man with gray hair and clean shoes and soft hands was already reviewing a folder with Ethan Mercer's name on the cover, checking the last box on a list that ended with a child disappearing into a system designed to make sure no one ever looked for him again. The next 14 hours moved like a detonation in slow motion, every second visible, every decision irreversible, every breath drawn with the understanding that it might be the last one taken inside a world that still made sense. Damon pulled the 26 boxes from the motorcycles and stacked them in the main room of the clubhouse, while Vasquez sorted through the contents with the speed and precision of someone who had already memorized half of what she was looking at. She worked on the floor, cross-legged, spreading documents across the hardwood in overlapping patterns that resembled a crime scene reconstruction, which Damon realized was exactly what it was. Roach made the call at 11:15 a.m. Not to the police, not to a lawyer, to a number he kept in a leather notebook locked inside the bottom drawer of his desk, a number he'd never used in the entire history of the Iron Veil because the man on the other end of it was the kind of favor you only called in once. His name was Carol Briggs, former Marine JAG officer, now a defense attorney operating out of a one-man practice in Decatur with a reputation for taking cases that no one else wanted and winning them through a combination of legal precision and the kind of moral stubbornness that made judges either respect him or hate him. He owed Roach a debt from 1993 that neither man ever discussed in front of other people. Briggs answered on the second ring. "It's me," Roach said. "I'm calling it in." 20 minutes later, Briggs was on the road. While Vasquez worked the documents and Roach coordinated logistics, Damon sat with Ethan in the back room. The boy hadn't been told everything. He'd been told enough. Enough to understand that the man who had come to his school was dangerous. Enough to understand that a legal process was being used as a weapon. Enough to understand that the people in this building were the only barrier between him and something he couldn't fully comprehend but could feel. The way animals feel a storm before it arrives. In the bones, in the silence, in the way the air pressure changes. "They're going to try to take me," Ethan said. Not a question. His voice was flat. The flatness of a kid who had been moved so many times that the concept of being taken had lost its capacity to shock and now just sat in his vocabulary like any other word. "They're going to try," Damon said. "They're not going to succeed." "How do you know?" "Because I know what they look like when they succeed. I've seen it. I lived it. And I'm not going to watch it happen to you." Ethan looked at him. 14 years old, sitting on a couch in a biker clubhouse with duct-taped sneakers and a hoodie that smelled like rain and sweat and the particular chemical scent of institutional laundry detergent. His eyes held something that Damon had seen once before, in the photograph of Cassie standing in front of the loading dock. The look of someone measuring whether the person in front of them is worth trusting with the only thing they have left. "My foster mom won't fight it," Ethan said. "If a court order comes, she'll open the door and hand me over. She's done it before. With another kid. Marcus, he was 12. A man came with paperwork and she signed him out like a library book. I never saw Marcus again." The words landed in Damon's chest like shrapnel. He kept his face still. "What was the man's name?" "The one who took Marcus." "She called him Mr. Fell." The room contracted. Martin Fell, the field coordinator. Gray hair. Clean shoes. soft hands. The man in the background of the photograph from Hargrove's archive. He had been in this town before. He had taken a child before. From the same foster home. On the same street. Cedar Lane wasn't a coincidence. It was a pipeline station. Damon stood up. "Stay in this room. Keep the lock on. I'll be back." He walked into the main room and found Vasquez on her knees, surrounded by documents, her blazer discarded, her sleeves rolled to the elbows, a pen clenched between her teeth. She looked up. "Fell took another kid from that foster home," Damon said. "A boy named Marcus, approximately 2 years ago." Vasquez pulled the pen from her mouth. "Marcus Dunn, age 12 at time of disappearance. Reported as a voluntary runaway by the foster mother 6 days after placement. Case closed within the standard window. File transferred to inactive storage." She said it from memory, without checking a single page. "He's one of the 4 Pike identified yesterday." "You knew?" "I've known for 2 years. I couldn't prove the connection without compromising Cassie's position inside the network. And after she was killed, I couldn't prove it without the evidence in this room." She gestured at the scattered documents. "Which I now have. But I don't have time. The hearing is in..." She checked her watch. 19 hours. And the only way to stop it is to present enough evidence to that judge to make him understand that the man petitioning for custody is part of a trafficking operation. Will the evidence be enough? For a federal grand jury? Absolutely. For a county family court judge in a town of 4,000 people who has never denied an emergency custody petition in 14 years? She looked at him with the exhausted honesty of someone who had stopped pretending the system worked. "I don't know." Briggs arrived at 2:40 p.m. He was a tall man in his mid-60s with a gray beard trimmed to regulation length and a suit that fit him the way uniforms fit men who never fully left the military. Precise, functional, without a single concession to comfort or style. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been through a war, which it had. He shook Roach's hand, nodded at the room, and sat down at the bar with a legal pad and a pen. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Leave nothing out." They told him. Damon started with the coin. Vasquez continued with the federal investigation. Pike laid out the corporate structure. Hutch presented the surveillance footage. Roach provided the context, the history, the timeline, the 20 years of silence that had been broken by a brass eagle under a motorcycle tire. Briggs listened without interrupting. He took notes in a shorthand that only he could read. When they finished, he set his pen down and looked at the documents spread across the floor. "The hearing tomorrow isn't about custody," he said. "It's about access. Fell doesn't want to raise this child. He wants to transport him." The emergency petition is a tool, a legal instrument that gives him physical possession of a minor with the authority of a court order behind it. Once he has the boy in a vehicle, the paper trail ends. The child becomes a runaway. Another closed file. "Can you stop it?" Damon asked. "I can challenge the petition. I can present evidence of fraud, the forged credentials, the fabricated home study, the letter from a dead DCFS supervisor. That alone should be enough to delay the hearing. But delay isn't the same as dismissal. If Fell is smart, and based on what I'm hearing, he's very smart, he'll withdraw the petition, regroup, and try again through a different channel. Maybe a different county. Maybe a different name." "Then we don't just delay it," Vasquez said. "We use the hearing as a trigger. We present enough evidence to establish probable cause for the entire network. Not just Fell, Deschler, Cornerstone, all of it. We turn a custody hearing into an evidentiary hearing. We put it on the record in open court where it can't be sealed, can't be buried, can't be made to disappear the way my federal investigation was." Briggs looked at her for a long moment. "That's a career-ending move for you." "My career ended 6 weeks ago when someone with a phone call shut down a 3-year investigation into child trafficking. I'm not here for my career. I'm here because a woman I was supposed to protect was murdered, and the system I work for decided that was an acceptable outcome." The room was quiet. Briggs nodded once. "Then we prepare. I need every document organized, indexed, and cross-referenced by midnight. I need affidavits from anyone willing to sign. I need the photographs authenticated with timestamps. And I need that boy ready to testify if it comes to it." "He's 14, Damon said. "I know how old he is, and I know what's at stake. The question isn't whether he's old enough. The question is whether he's willing. That's a conversation you need to have with him, not me. The afternoon dissolved into organized fury. Vasquez and Pike worked the documents, building a chronological evidence package that traced the network from its earliest recorded operation through Cassie's infiltration, Hargrove's archive, and the current threat to Ethan. Briggs drafted legal motions at the bar, his pen moving with a speed and confidence that belied the complexity of what he was constructing. Hutch and Sutter ran perimeter security, rotating shifts with Greaves and Bone, maintaining surveillance on every approach to the clubhouse. Damon had the conversation with Ethan at 4:15 p.m. He sat on the couch next to the boy and explained, carefully, honestly, without decoration, what was going to happen the next morning. A hearing, a courtroom, a judge, and the possibility that Ethan might be asked to describe what he'd seen. The van, the man at his school, the envelope under the motorcycle, the days of watching and waiting, and the slow creeping certainty that something was wrong. "You don't have to do this," Damon said. "Nobody is going to force you. If you say no, we find another way." Ethan was quiet for a long time. He sat with his hands between his knees, his shoulders rounded, his eyes fixed on a point on the floor that didn't exist. The posture of a child deciding something that no child should ever have to decide. "Marcus," he said finally, "the kid from my foster home, the one Fell took. Nobody asked him if he wanted to go. Nobody asked him anything. He was just gone. And the next day his bed was made and his shelf was cleared and my foster mom acted like he'd never been there at all." He paused. "I think about him. Every night. I think about where he is. If he's scared. If he's wondering why nobody came looking. Ethan, I'll do it." The boy looked up. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was set, a combination that Damon recognized because he'd seen it in every mirror he'd ever stood in front of. The expression of someone who has decided that being afraid is not a sufficient reason to stay silent. "I'll tell them what I saw. All of it." Damon put his hand on the boy's shoulder. He didn't squeeze. He didn't pull him close. He just let the weight of his hand rest there. Steady, present, the physical equivalent of a promise that required no words. Night came early. By 6 p.m., the sky was black and the temperature had dropped into the low 20s, and the clubhouse windows were fogged with condensation from the bodies and breath and barely contained energy of 12 people working toward a deadline that felt more like a fuse. At 7:30 p.m., Damon's phone rang. Unknown number. He answered. "Mr. Cross." The voice on the other end was calm, male, mid-range, the kind of voice that belonged to someone accustomed to controlling conversations the way a conductor controls an orchestra, with small, precise movements that the audience never sees. "My name is Raymond Deschler. I believe we have matters to discuss." Damon's grip on the phone tightened until the case creaked. Every head in the room turned toward him. Vasquez froze mid-motion, a document suspended in her hand. Roach straightened behind the bar, his pale eyes locking onto Damon's face with the intensity of a targeting system. "I'm listening," Damon said. "I understand you've come into possession of certain materials that once belonged to a former associate of mine, a woman named Linda Hargrove. I also understand that a federal agent of questionable standing is currently inside your establishment, operating without authorization from her own agency. And I understand that an attorney is preparing to present fraudulent evidence in a custody proceeding tomorrow morning." Damon said nothing. "Let me be clear about what happens next," Deschler continued. "If that hearing takes place, the boy becomes a target. Not tomorrow, not next week, for the rest of his life. Every document you present becomes a public record. Every name you mention becomes a thread that leads back to that child. You think you're protecting him by putting him in front of a judge. You're painting a target on his back that will never come off. Like the target you painted on my sister." Silence. 3 seconds. 4. "Your sister made choices," Deschler said. "Unfortunate choices. She could have walked away at any point. She chose to stay. She chose to collect information that was never meant to be collected. And she chose to trust a system that ultimately failed to protect her. That wasn't my doing. That was hers." Damon's vision narrowed. The room around him compressed into a tunnel of sharp edges and fluorescent light. He could feel his pulse in his temples, in his wrists, in the scars on his forearms, every damaged nerve ending in his body firing simultaneously. "Are you finished?" Damon asked. I'm offering you an alternative. Return the materials. Send the federal agent away. Cancel the attorney. And the boy stays safe. Not through a court order, through my personal guarantee. No one touches him. No one approaches him. He lives his life. You live yours. And this matter ends quietly, the way it should have ended 20 years ago. The way it ended for Cassie? Your sister's death was a tragedy, but tragedies don't require sequels, Mr. Cross. Walk away, while walking is still an option. Damon looked across the room at Roach. The old man gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Not agreement, not instruction. Confirmation. The confirmation that Damon was who Roach had always believed him to be. The kind of man who doesn't walk away. Not from a threat, not from a fight. Not from a child sitting in a back room with duct-taped shoes and a jaw set like concrete. 9 a.m. tomorrow, Damon said into the phone. Ridgecrest County Courthouse, Courtroom B. I'll save you a seat. He hung up. The room exhaled. They'll move tonight, Vasquez said immediately. Her voice had shifted, no longer the measured tone of an investigator, the sharp, clipped cadence of someone switching from analysis to operational mode. Deschler doesn't make phone calls unless he's already set the contingency in motion. That call was buying time. Somewhere right now, Fell is coordinating. Coordinating what? Pike asked. Either they come for the evidence or they come for the boy. Or both. Roach tapped his cane on the floor 3 times. The sound cut through the room like a gavel. Hutch, get on the phone. Every patch member, every prospect, every brother who's ever owed this club a favor within a 100-mile radius. I want them here by midnight. How many? All of them. Hutch made 17 calls in 45 minutes. By 10 p.m., the first bikes started arriving, singles and pairs rolling into the parking lot with their headlights cutting through the frozen darkness like searchlights sweeping a perimeter. Men Damon hadn't seen in months. Men who rode 3 hours through sub-zero wind on highways slick with black ice because a phone call told them to come, and that was enough. No explanations required, no questions asked. Just the sound of engines and boots and leather and the particular gravity that accumulates when men who have survived things together gather in one place because one of their own needs them. By midnight, the parking lot held 47 motorcycles. The clubhouse was standing room only. The air smelled like leather, motor oil, cold sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of adrenaline, the scent of a room full of men whose bodies had already decided what was coming even if their minds hadn't been briefed. Roach stood at the front. He didn't raise his voice. He never had to. Most of you don't know the details, he said. You don't need them all tonight. What you need to know is this. There's a boy in the back room of this building, 14 years old. Tomorrow morning, a man is going to walk into a courthouse and try to take legal custody of that boy so he can make him disappear, the same way he's made other children disappear for 2 decades. We have evidence. We have a lawyer. We have a federal agent. And by morning, we will have the truth on the record. He paused. Let the words settle. Tonight, we protect the evidence. We protect the boy, and we protect this building. Because the people on the other side of this, they're not going to wait for the hearing. They're going to try to stop it. No one spoke. No one needed to. Roach assigned positions. Perimeter teams in 2-hour rotations. Mobile patrols on 3 approach roads. 2 men on the courthouse. Because if Deschler was smart enough to target the evidence, he was smart enough to target the location where it would be presented. Communication through a dedicated channel. No cell phones. No open lines. Runner protocol for sensitive updates. It was a military operation executed by men who had never stopped being soldiers, even after the military told them they were finished. Damon stood at the garage bay door at 1:15 a.m. smoking a cigarette he didn't want because his hands needed something to do, and his mind needed something to focus on that wasn't the photograph of his sister in his jacket pocket or the sound of Deschler's voice saying, "Tragedies don't require sequels," with the practiced ease of a man who had made tragedies his business model. Vasquez appeared beside him. She'd removed her blazer hours ago. The white shirt was wrinkled beyond recognition. Her hair had come loose from its tie and hung across one shoulder. She looked like a woman who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had just realized she was no longer carrying it alone. "He'll send Fell first," she said. "Fell knows the area, knows the foster home, knows the school routes. If they're coming for Ethan before the hearing, Fell leads. How many people does Deschler have? In this region, 8 to 12. Drivers, coordinators, facilitators. They're not soldiers. They're logistics people. They move children, not cargo. They rely on systems, not force. Court orders, forged documents, compliant foster parents. They've never had to use violence because they've never been confronted. Until now. Until now. Damon dropped the cigarette and crushed it under his boot. If they get to the evidence, I've made copies, digital, uploaded to 3 encrypted servers. Even if they burn every physical document in that building, the evidence survives. Your sister was careful, but I'm careful too. He looked at her. Why didn't you do this sooner? The copies, the backups. Because until tonight, I didn't have the originals. The storage unit was Cassie's dead drop. I knew it existed. She told me the location, but she never gave me the combination to the safe. She said the combination was something only family would know. 2004. The year Cassie disappeared. The year Damon had used to open the safe. His sister had designed the system so that only he could unlock it. She had built her entire operation, 14 months of intelligence, 20 years of evidence, the documentation of a network that had consumed her childhood and her adult life and ultimately her existence, around the certainty that her brother would come looking. And he had. 20 years late. But he had. The first sign of trouble came at 3:47 a.m. Greaves, positioned on the east approach road, keyed his radio twice. The signal for contact. Damon was at the communications table in 4 strides. 2 vehicles. Eastbound on Route 9, running dark, no headlights, speed approximately 40. They passed my position 30 seconds ago. Damon looked at Roach. The old man was already moving, cane striking the floor, in rapid, precise beats as he crossed to the front window. Bone? South approach? Anything? Negative. Road's clear. Hutch. West? Clear. They're coming from the east, Roach said. 2 vehicles. Running dark means they don't want to be seen. Pike, how far is the east approach from the parking lot? 1/4 mile. Maybe less. At 40 miles an hour, they're here in... Headlights exploded across the front windows. Not from the east. From the north. A 3rd vehicle, a dark SUV, had come up the service road behind the grain elevator, a route that wasn't on any map because it was a private agricultural access path that only locals knew about. The SUV's high beams flooded the clubhouse front, turning every window into a rectangle of blinding white light. Shadows scattered across the main room. Men moved, fast, instinctive, the muscle memory of combat training overriding everything else. Damon heard the sound of 47 men simultaneously shifting from rest to ready. The rustle of leather, the scrape of boots, the metallic click of hands finding objects in the dark. Nobody moves outside, Roach commanded. They want us to react. They want us to come out. We don't. The SUV sat for 30 seconds, engine running, high beams burning. Then it reversed, slowly, deliberately, back down the service road and disappeared. Probing, again, testing the perimeter, cataloging response patterns. Greaves, Damon said into the radio. The 2 eastbound vehicles, position? Static, 2 seconds, 3. They've stopped, pulled off into the grain elevator lot. Engines off. I can see 2 figures exiting the lead vehicle. They're on foot, moving toward... A pause. Moving toward the south side of the clubhouse. Damon looked at Roach. The south side of this clubhouse had 1 door, a fire exit that opened into a narrow alley between the building and a concrete retaining wall. The alley was 8 feet wide, unlit, and terminated in a chain-link gate that had been padlocked since before Damon joined the club. Sutter, Dex, south door, now. The 2 prospects moved through the building like shadows. Sutter carried a flashlight. Dex carried nothing but his hands and the wiry, coiled energy of a man who had been waiting for something to do with them all night. 90 seconds of silence. Then Sutter's voice on the radio, barely above a whisper. 2 males, south alley. They've cut the padlock on the gate. They're carrying containers. I think... A pause, the sound of breathing. Gasoline. They're carrying gasoline. The word hit the room like a grenade. They weren't coming for the evidence through the door. They were coming to burn the building down. Do not engage. Roach said into the radio. His voice was ice. Sutter, Dex, hold position. Let them enter the alley. Let them get past the gate. Once they're inside the alley, they're in a box. One way in, one way out. Damon was already moving. He crossed the main room, grabbed Vasquez by the arm, not roughly, but with urgency that didn't leave room for discussion, and pointed toward the back room. Get Ethan. Get the evidence boxes. Load them into Hutch's truck. If this building burns, the boy and the documents go first. Vasquez didn't argue. She ran. Damon turned to Pike. Call 911. Tell them we have trespassers with accelerants attempting arson on an occupied structure. Give them the address. Then call the fire department. Then call every news station within 50 miles. News stations? Deschler killed my sister because nobody was watching. We make sure everyone is watching. Pike started dialing. In the south alley, the two men had entered the channel between the clubhouse and the retaining wall. They moved quickly, crouched, pouring gasoline along the base of the building's exterior wall in a line that followed the foundation from the gate toward the fire exit door. The smell hit Sutter's nostrils before the flashlight beam found them, the sharp, nauseous sweetness of gasoline in cold air, a smell that erases every other sensation and replaces it with the primal understanding that everything around you is about to change state. Now, Roach's voice said through the radio. Sutter hit the flashlight. 1,000 lumens of white light flooded the alley, catching both men mid-crouch, one holding a red plastic gas can, the other holding a lighter that he hadn't yet struck. They froze. The deer-in-headlights paralysis of men who had expected darkness and found themselves exposed. From the fire exit door, Dex stepped into the alley. From the gate behind them, 3 Iron Veil brothers appeared, blocking the only exit, boxed, exactly as Roach had designed. Put it down, Sutter said. The can, the lighter, on the ground. Now. The man with the lighter looked at the man with the gas can. A calculation passed between them, the kind of silent arithmetic that men do when they're weighing the odds of fighting their way out against the odds of surviving if they don't. The calculation took 1.5 seconds. The lighter hit the ground. The gas can followed. The man with the gas can was wearing a blue windbreaker, clean shoes, gray hair. Martin fell. Damon arrived in the alley 30 seconds later. He stood in the flashlight beam, looking at the man who had walked into Ethan's school, who had taken Marcus Dunn from Cedar Lane, who had coordinated the movement of children across state lines for over a decade with the calm efficiency of a freight dispatcher. Fell looked back at him. His face was composed. Even now, caught in an alley with gasoline on his hands and 5 bikers surrounding him, his expression carried the particular arrogance of a man who had operated above consequences for so long that he genuinely believed they didn't apply to him. You're making a mistake, Fell said. His voice was steady, almost bored. This changes nothing. The petition stands, the hearing proceeds, you can't— You're right, Damon said. The hearing proceeds, and you'll be there, in handcuffs, sitting in front of a judge who's about to learn exactly what you've been doing in his county for the last 10 years. Sirens. Distant but approaching. The sound carried across the frozen farmland with the clarity of a bell, growing louder with each second. Fell's composure cracked. Not dramatically. A hairline fracture, visible only in the micro-movement of his jaw and the slight widening of his pupils. The composure of a man who had just realized that the system he'd relied on to protect him had been outflanked by people who understood that system better than he did. Behind Damon, in the parking lot, 47 motorcycles sat in the frozen dark like sentinels. Inside the clubhouse, a federal agent was loading evidence boxes into a truck. Somewhere in Ridgecrest, a lawyer was reviewing the final pages of a motion that would crack open a courtroom like a surgeon opening a chest cavity. And in the back room, a 14-year-old boy was putting on his shoes. The duct-taped sneakers that had carried him past a white van, through a parking lot, and into the life of a man who had been waiting 20 years for someone to bring him a reason to stop being a ghost. The sirens grew louder. Damon stood in the alley with gasoline soaking into the frozen ground around his boots, looking at the man who had taken children for a living, and for the first time in 20 years, the weight in his chest shifted. Not lighter. Not heavier, different. The weight of a man who is no longer carrying grief alone. The police cruisers turned onto Gravel Street. The headlights swept across the clubhouse, and in his jacket pocket, pressed against his ribs, the challenge coin with an eagle on one side and a dead man's initials on the other sat steady and warm. A compass that had taken 2 decades to point home, carried by a girl who had spent her entire adult life making sure the needle would eventually find north. 9 a.m. was 6 hours away. The hearing would proceed, and everything Raymond Deschler had built in the dark was about to be dragged into the light by a brotherhood of broken men who understood one truth: that no trafficking network, no shell company, no forged court order could ever defeat. You don't have to be whole to protect someone. You just have to be there. The police arrived at 3:52 a.m. 2 cruisers from the Ridgecrest Department and a county sheriff's unit that had been dispatched from 20 miles east. 6 officers total. They found Martin Fell and his associate face down on the frozen ground of the South Alley, with their hands zip-tied behind their backs, 2 empty gasoline cans sitting upright against the retaining wall, and a lighter resting on the concrete exactly where it had landed. Fell said nothing during the arrest. His associate, a younger man with a shaved head and a commercial driver's license from a county 3 hours south, talked immediately. Not because anyone pressured him, because the moment the handcuffs clicked shut and the flashlight beams hit his face and the sound of 47 motorcycle engines idling in the parking lot reached his ears, whatever loyalty or fear had held him inside Deschler's network collapsed like a structure built on sand. He gave them names, routes, dates, a storage facility in Indiana, a receiving house in Missouri, a transportation schedule that operated on a 14-day rotation using vehicles registered to Deschler and Sons Fine Furniture Restoration. Vasquez stood beside the county sheriff's deputy and recorded every word on her phone, not as a federal agent, as a witness, a private citizen documenting a voluntary statement made in the presence of law enforcement on a public street. The deputy looked at her credentials, looked at the gasoline cans, looked at the 47 bikers standing in disciplined silence around the perimeter of the parking lot, and made the only decision that made sense. He called the state police. By 5 a.m., the Ridgecrest Clubhouse parking lot looked like a forward operating base. State police vehicles, a fire marshal's truck, an ambulance that had been dispatched as a precaution and sat with its lights off near the entrance, the paramedics inside drinking coffee and watching the organized chaos through the windshield. 2 news vans from stations in Springfield and Decatur, Pike's calls had worked. Their satellite dishes extended into the pre-dawn sky like mechanical flowers reaching for a signal. The cameras changed everything. The moment the first reporter set up a live shot in front of the clubhouse, with the row of motorcycles visible behind her, the story stopped being something that could be managed, contained, or buried. It became public. It became documented. It became the kind of thing that people would reference in future conversations with the words, "Did you see?" and "Can you believe?" and right here in our own backyard. Deschler's power had always depended on invisibility, on the assumption that no one was watching, on the certainty that the systems he had corrupted, foster care, family court, law enforcement, corporate registration, would continue to function as shields because no one had ever held them up to the light. The light was here now, and it was unforgiving. At 6:30 a.m., Damon sat in the garage bay on the same metal folding chair where this had started. Was it only 3 days ago? And watched the sky lighten through the open door. The temperature had risen slightly, just enough to turn the ice in the parking lot back into water that reflected the emergency lights in streaks of red and blue. He held a cup of coffee that someone had pressed into his hands at some point. He didn't remember who. He didn't remember drinking any of it, but the cup was half empty. His body ached in places he hadn't known could ache. Not from injury. From the sustained physiological toll of 3 days without sleep, without proper food, without a single moment where his nervous system had been allowed to step down from the state of readiness that had begun the instant a 14-year-old boy held up a brass coin in a rain-soaked doorway. Roach appeared in the garage bay. He moved slowly this morning. The cold had gotten into his prosthetic joint, and the mechanical rhythm of his walk had developed a slight hitch, a millisecond delay between the plant of the cane and the swing of the artificial leg. He sat down on an overturned bucket near the workbench and said nothing for a full minute. 2 men, a garage, the smell of motor oil and coffee, and the fading trace of gasoline from the South Alley. State police are coordinating with the FBI field office in Springfield, Roach said finally. Vasquez's encrypted files gave them enough for emergency warrants. They're hitting the Carlisle facility, the warehouse, and the residential property simultaneously. Deschler's name is on every warrant. Damon nodded. Briggs is at the courthouse. He filed the motions at 6. The emergency custody petition has been suspended pending investigation. The judge... Roach paused, a sound that might have been a laugh if it had any humor in it. The judge apparently turned white when he read the filing. 14 years of rubber stamping petitions without scrutiny, and now he's looking at a document that suggests at least 3 of those petitions were part of a trafficking pipeline that operated in his jurisdiction. He didn't know. I think he didn't want to know. There's a difference. One is ignorance. The other is a choice. Damon stared at his coffee. The surface trembled slightly, not from any external vibration, from the fine tremor in his hands that he'd been suppressing for 3 days and could no longer control. Roach. Yeah. She was alive. All that time. She was right there. The old man was quiet. The garage filled with the distant sound of radio chatter from the state police vehicles and the low rumble of a news helicopter that had appeared over Ridgecrest sometime in the last hour, circling the town like a mechanical vulture drawn to the scent of a story. I know, Roach said. I could have found her, if I'd looked harder, if I'd pushed further, if I hadn't... Damon's voice broke. Not dramatically, the way a wire breaks when it's been carrying too much current for too long. A quiet snap, followed by silence. If I hadn't spent 3 years at the bottom of a bottle feeling sorry for myself, I could have... Stop. Damon looked at him. Roach leaned forward on the bucket. His pale eyes held something that Damon had never seen in them before. Not the tactical focus, not the command presence, not the steady authority of a man who had led other men through darkness for 50 years. Something softer. Something that cost him to show. Your sister made a choice, Roach said. The bravest choice I've ever heard of. She stayed inside a machine that was destroying children so she could document every gear, every lever, every hand that turned the wheel. She did that for 20 years. She did it knowing she might die. And she did it knowing that if she reached out to you, if she called, if she wrote, if she showed up at your door, you would have come for her. And coming for her would have blown the entire operation before she had enough to bring it down. Damon's jaw tightened until the muscles in his temples stood out like cables. She didn't stay away because she didn't love you, Roach said. She stayed away because she loved you too much to let you be the reason those kids never got justice. The words hit a place inside Damon that he'd walled off so thoroughly he'd forgotten it existed. The place where the 11-year-old version of his sister still lived. The girl with the construction paper birthday cards and the doodled horses and the challenge coin in her pocket. The girl who had carried their father's eagle into the dark and spent her whole life turning it into a compass that would lead her brother home. He put the coffee cup on the workbench. He put his elbows on his knees. He put his face in his hands, and for the first time in 20 years, Damon Cross cried. Not the silent, controlled kind, not the kind he could swallow and compartmentalize and file away behind the walls he'd built. The kind that comes from the deepest basement of a man's architecture, structural, seismic, the kind that reorganizes everything above it. His shoulders shook. His breath came in ragged, wet pulls that fogged the space between his palms. The sound that came out of him was raw and ugly and human in the way that only grief can be when it finally stops pretending to be strength. Roach didn't touch him, didn't speak. He sat on the overturned bucket with his cane across his lap and his damaged body and his 50 years of carrying other men's weight, and he held the space the way a retaining wall holds earth, silently, structurally, without expectation of recognition. When it passed, and it did pass, not because the grief ended, but because the body eventually runs out of fuel for that particular fire. Damon sat up, wiped his face with the shop rag on the workbench, took a breath that went all the way down to the floor of his lungs. Okay, he said. Okay, Roach said. They sat together in the garage for another minute. Then Damon stood, put on his jacket, and walked inside to find Ethan. The boy was in the main room, sitting on the same bar stool where he'd eaten scrambled eggs 36 hours ago. He was wearing clothes that someone had found for him, a flannel shirt that was too big in the shoulders, and a pair of jeans that had been rolled at the cuffs. His duct-taped sneakers were gone, replaced by a pair of work boots that belonged to one of the prospects and were 2 sizes too large but clean and dry and warm. He was watching the news vans through the window. "Hey," Damon said. Ethan turned. His eyes moved across Damon's face and registered what was there: the redness, the exhaustion, the particular rawness that follows the kind of crying that leaves a man looking like he's been rebuilt from the inside out. The boy didn't comment on it. Foster kids learned early that some things you see on an adult's face are not yours to name. "Is it over?" Ethan asked. "The hearing is suspended. Fell is in custody. The state police are executing warrants on Deschler's properties right now." "So it's over." Damon sat on the stool next to him. "The emergency part is over. The legal part is going to take a long time. Months, maybe years. There are going to be investigations, trials, people asking you questions. Briggs will be with you for all of it. Vasquez, too." Ethan processed this. His hands rested on the bar top. Steady, still, the hands of a boy who had stopped shaking sometime in the night and hadn't started again. "What happens to me?" he asked. "After today. Where do I go?" It was the question that Damon had been carrying since the moment he'd told the kid to sit down on a milk crate in the garage. The question that had no good answer because every answer required a system, foster care, family court, child welfare, that had already proven itself incapable of protecting this child. "Where do you want to go?" Damon asked. Ethan looked at the bar, at the coffee ring stains on the wood, at the row of bottles on the shelf behind the counter, at the clubhouse around him, this battered, imperfect, oil-stained building full of scarred men and stale air, and the particular warmth that accumulates in a place where people have chosen each other instead of being assigned to each other. "Can I stay here?" he said, so quietly that Damon almost missed it. Damon looked at Roach, who was standing in the doorway of the garage bay with his cane in his hand listening. The old man gave a nod so slight it was barely visible, but it carried the weight of everything he was: founder, leader, protector, the man who had built the Iron Veil not as a gang or a club or a brand, but as a perimeter around people the world had decided weren't worth protecting. "We'll figure it out," Damon said, "but you're not going back to Cedar Lane. Not today. Not ever." The morning unfolded in fragments after that, each one landing in sequence like the final pieces of a structure that had taken 20 years to build. At 8:15 a.m., the state police confirmed that the Carlisle facility had been secured. Inside Deschler and Sons Fine Furniture Restoration, behind a false wall in the loading dock area, they found a room with 6 cots, a locked bathroom, and evidence of recent habitation. Children's clothing, school supplies still in their packaging, a box of prepaid cell phones, and on the wall, written in pencil in a child's handwriting that had been partially scrubbed but not fully erased, "Help us." At 9:30 a.m., Raymond Deschler was arrested at his residence in Whitfield County. He was found in his study, dressed in a suit, drinking coffee, as if he had been expecting them. He said nothing during the arrest. His attorney, who arrived within 20 minutes, said even less. But the warrant allowed a search of the premises, and what the investigators found in the basement filing cabinets: 20 years of meticulous records, every transaction, every transfer, every name, confirmed what Cassie Cross had spent her life documenting from the inside. He had kept his own records. The arrogance of a man who believed he would never be caught had become the instrument of his destruction. At 10:45 a.m., Vasquez received a call from the FBI field office. Her former investigation had been reopened, not by her supervisors, by the Department of Justice, responding to the media coverage that was now running on 4 local stations and 2 national networks. The political pressure that had shut her down 6 weeks ago had reversed course with the speed and reliability of a weather vane in a windstorm. The same people who had buried her case were now falling over themselves to be seen supporting it. She took the call standing in the parking lot of the clubhouse, surrounded by motorcycles, wearing a wrinkled shirt and borrowed boots from the club's Lost and Found. And when she hung up, she stood very still for a moment with her phone pressed against her chest and her eyes closed and her face tilted toward a sky that had finally, after 11 days, stopped raining. At noon, Briggs returned from the courthouse. He sat in the main room with Roach and Damon and Vasquez, and laid out the legal landscape with the same precision he'd used to dismantle enemy arguments in military courtrooms 30 years ago. The custody petition was dead. Bell's associate had signed a cooperation agreement. Deskler's attorney had requested a continuance that the judge denied. Preliminary charges included trafficking, conspiracy, fraud, arson, and obstruction, and that was just the beginning. "The evidence your sister compiled," Briggs said, looking at Damon, "is the most comprehensive documentation of a trafficking network I've ever seen. It connects 4 states, 17 years of operations, and more than 40 victims. Some of those victims may still be locatable. Some of them may still be alive." Damon heard the words, processed them, understood their magnitude. But the part of his mind that translated information into emotion was temporarily offline, overloaded, like a circuit breaker that had tripped to prevent a fire. He would feel this later, in the days and weeks that followed, in the quiet moments when the adrenaline finally drained and the reality of what his sister had accomplished settled into his understanding like sediment reaching the bottom of a river. For now, he nodded. "There's one more thing," Briggs said. He opened his briefcase and removed a single sheet of paper. "I pulled this from the county records this morning. It's a handwritten amendment to Linda Hargrove's last will and testament, filed 6 months before her death. It designates a beneficiary for any materials stored in Unit 14C at the Carlisle facility." He set the paper on the table. The beneficiary line read, "Damon Cross, brother of Cassandra Cross, or his designee." Hargrove had known. Before she died, she had ensured that the archive, Cassie's life's work, would legally belong to the one person Cassie had built it for. Damon picked up the paper. Read it twice. Set it down. "She thought of everything," he said quietly. "She learned from the best," Vasquez said. And the way she said it, with a roughness in her voice that had nothing to do with fatigue and everything to do with the specific sorrow of a handler who had lost the bravest person she'd ever worked with, told Damon that whatever his sister had become inside that network, she had not been alone at the end. She had been seen, valued, mourned by at least one person who understood what her sacrifice had cost. The afternoon passed slowly after that. The pace of the story decelerated the way a heartbeat decelerates after a sprint. Gradually, reluctantly, the body resisting the return to rest because rest meant feeling everything it had been outrunning. The news crews packed up by 2 p.m. The state police vehicles left in stages. The county sheriff posted a deputy outside the clubhouse as a precaution, a young officer who spent most of his shift sitting in his cruiser, reading a paperback novel, and occasionally glancing at the row of motorcycles with an expression that suggested he was reconsidering some of his assumptions about the men who rode them. The Iron Veil brothers who had ridden through the night began departing in small groups, 2s and 3s peeling out of the parking lot with the unhurried rhythm of men who had done what they came to do and required nothing in return except the knowledge that it mattered. Each one passed Damon on the way out. Some nodded, some clasped his hand. One, a massive bearded man named Dutch, who had ridden 4 hours from a town near the Iowa border and hadn't spoken a single word all night, stopped in front of Damon, looked at him for 3 full seconds, then placed his hand flat against Damon's chest, over the pocket where the challenge coin sat, and held it there. No words, just pressure, just presence. The physical language of men who had learned to say everything important without opening their mouths. By 4 p.m., the clubhouse was quiet. Roach dozed in his office chair. Pike sat at the bar cleaning his laptop screen with a cloth, his movements slow and deliberate, the decompression ritual of a young veteran who needed his hands to be busy, while his mind processed what they'd been through. Hutch had gone to the gas station for supplies and came back with 4 bags of groceries. Real food, not the bachelor refrigerator provisions that usually stocked the kitchen. He cooked without being asked. Chili. From scratch. The smell filled the clubhouse like an argument for continued existence. Ethan helped. He stood next to Hutch at the stove, stirring the pot when told to stir, chopping onions with a concentration that suggested he had never been trusted with a kitchen knife before, and was taking the responsibility seriously. Hutch didn't talk much. He didn't need to. The act of cooking beside someone, of sharing a task, of occupying the same space for the same purpose, was its own communication, its own proof that the boy existed in a world where people wanted him present. They ate at 5:30 p.m., all of them. Around the bar, on stools and folding chairs, and one overturned milk crate that Ethan chose specifically because it was the same one he'd sat on 3 days ago when everything started. The chili was good, not remarkable, not gourmet, just good, warm and filling, and made by someone who gave a damn, which was all any meal ever needed to be. Nobody talked about the case. Nobody talked about Deschler or Fell or warrants or court dates. They talked about motorcycles, about roads they'd ridden and whether they'd survived, and the particular mechanical stubbornness of Harley engines in cold climates. They talked about nothing. And the nothing was everything. After dinner, Damon walked outside. The evening sky was clear for the first time in almost 2 weeks. The clouds had broken apart and drifted east, leaving behind a sky that deepened from pale gold at the horizon to a navy blue that was almost black overhead. Stars were appearing one by one, faint at first, then brighter as the last light bled out of the west. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few bikes, the rusted pickup truck that still belonged to no one, and Damon's black Harley Softail parked in the same spot it had occupied when Ethan found the envelope under its front tire. Damon stood next to the bike. He pulled the challenge coin from his jacket pocket, both halves reassembled. The eagle on one side, crude and imperfect and hand-etched by a man who had died in a VA hospital bed before he could see what his daughter would become. The initials on the other, R.C. Robert Cross. A father's mark on a piece of brass that had outlived him by decades and carried his legacy through places he never could have imagined. The strip of waterproof paper was still inside. The GPS coordinates that had led to a storage unit full of evidence. And on the back, in Cassie's handwriting, "Forgive me." Damon turned the coin over in his fingers. The brass was warm from his body heat. The scratches along the edge, the tool marks where someone had opened the hidden compartment, caught the last light and glinted like tiny signals. Forgive me. He understood now. Not just what she was asking forgiveness for, but why she had asked it this way, written on paper, hidden inside brass, delivered through a chain of hands that included a murdered caseworker, a storage unit, and a boy who refused to walk past something that didn't feel right. She couldn't ask him in person because seeing him would have ended everything she was building. She couldn't call because any contact could be traced. She couldn't send a letter because letters required addresses, and addresses created connections, and connections were the thing that Deschler's network was designed to exploit. So she had written 2 words on a strip of paper and sealed them inside a coin and trusted that someday, somehow, her brother would find them. And he had. 20 years late, through a path she couldn't have predicted, delivered by a boy she never met. But he had found them. Damon pressed the coin between his palms and held it there, eyes closed, breathing steady. Standing in the parking lot of a biker clubhouse in a forgotten Midwestern town at the edge of night, holding the last physical object his sister had touched, and feeling, for the first time since a Red Cross notification reached him in a desert 20 years ago, that the distance between them had finally closed. "I forgive you," he said. 2 words, spoken aloud, into the cold air and the clear sky and the silence of a parking lot that had witnessed everything and held none of it against anyone. "I forgive you, Cass." The front door of the clubhouse opened behind him. Footsteps, not boots. The slightly too large work boots that belonged to a prospect and were being worn by a boy who had never owned a pair of shoes that fit right. Ethan stood beside him. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at the sky and the bikes and the coin in Damon's hands and the particular stillness of a man who had just set something down that he'd been carrying for longer than the boy had been alive. "Roach says you should come inside," Ethan said. Hutch made coffee, the good kind, not the stuff that tastes like engine cleaner. Damon almost smiled. Almost. The muscles required for it were out of practice, but they remembered the motion the way a rusty hinge remembers how to swing. "In a minute," Ethan nodded. He started to turn back toward the door, then stopped. "Damon." "Yeah." "Your sister. The things she did. Staying inside that place. Building all that evidence. Making sure somebody could use it someday." The boy's voice was steady. Older than his years. Carrying the particular gravity of someone who understood sacrifice not as an abstraction, but as the texture of daily life. She didn't do that because she gave up on getting out. She did it because she decided that getting out wasn't enough. She wanted to make sure nobody else had to get out. because nobody should have to be in there in the first place. Damon looked at him. A 14-year-old boy standing in oversized boots in a parking lot in Illinois, articulating the meaning of a woman's life with more clarity and less pretension than any eulogy could have managed. "Yeah," Damon said. "That's exactly what she did." Ethan reached into the pocket of the flannel shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper, notebook paper torn from a spiral binding. He unfolded it and held it out. It was a drawing, done in pencil, simple, a motorcycle parked under a sky full of stars with an eagle flying above it. The eagle was crude. Imperfect lines, uneven wings, the work of a hand that hadn't drawn much but had tried hard. Beneath the drawing, in block letters, "Thank you for not walking past." Damon took the drawing, looked at it, looked at the boy. "I did this during dinner," Ethan said. "The eagle's not very good." "It's perfect." Ethan's face did something complicated. A sequence of micro-expressions that started at embarrassment and traveled through surprise and arrived at a place that didn't have a name but looked like the first green shoot pushing through concrete. The face of a child who had just been told, perhaps for the first time, that something he made with his own hands was enough. "Come on," Damon said. "Let's get that coffee before Hutch drinks it all." They walked inside together. The clubhouse was warm. The overhead lights had been dimmed to a level that softened the edges of everything. The bar, the stools, the faces of the men who remained. Roach sat in his usual spot with a cup in his hand, and his cane resting against the bar in the expression of a man who had stayed awake for 3 days on behalf of people who needed him and would do it again tomorrow without being asked. Pike was showing Ethan something on his laptop, a motorcycle customization program, the two of them already arguing about paint colors with the comfortable antagonism of people who have decided, without announcing it, that they are going to keep knowing each other. Hutch poured Damon a cup of coffee. Black, hot, in a ceramic mug that had a chip on the rim and the Iron Veil crest faded to a ghost on the side. Damon wrapped his hands around it and felt the heat move through his fingers and into his wrists and up through his forearms and into the place behind his ribs where the weight had lived for 20 years. The weight was still there. It would always be there. Grief doesn't leave. It changes shape. It goes from a sharp thing that cuts to a heavy thing that anchors, and if a man is lucky, if he is surrounded by the right people and stubborn enough to let them stay, the anchor eventually stops dragging him to the bottom and starts holding him in place. He drank the coffee. It was good. Outside, the stars multiplied across the sky in their ancient, indifferent patterns. The temperature dropped. The puddles in the parking lot froze again, thin, clear ice that would crack under the first boots to cross it in the morning. The rusted pickup truck sat where it had always sat, belonging to no one, going nowhere. And Damon's black Harley Softail stood in the cold with its engine cooling and its chrome reflecting starlight, and beneath its front tire, exactly where it had been placed 3 days ago by hands that had crossed 20 years to put it there, a brass challenge coin with an eagle on one side and a dead father's initials on the other. Except it wasn't there anymore. It was inside, on the bar, next to a cup of coffee, next to a pencil drawing of a motorcycle under stars, next to a boy who had picked it up because he refused to walk past something that didn't feel right. Damon set down his mug. He picked up the coin. He turned it over once, feeling the weight, the warmth, the 20 years of distance compressed into an ounce of brass. Then he slid it across the bar to Ethan. The boy looked at it, looked at Damon. "I can't take this," Ethan said. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it." "But it was your sister's." "It was my father's. Then it was my sister's. Now it's yours." Damon paused. Sometimes history survives because one kid refuses to ignore what everyone else walks past. Ethan picked up the coin, held it in his palm, studied the eagle, the rough lines, the imperfect scratches, the 20 years of handling that had smoothed the edges and deepened the grooves until the image was less a drawing and more a scar in the metal. Then he smiled, small, uncertain, the smile of someone trying it on for the first time in a long time and finding, to his surprise, that it still fit. "No," Ethan said. He placed the coin back on the bar and pushed it toward Damon. "I think it belongs under your motorcycle again." Damon looked at the coin, then at the boy, then at the room, Roach with his cane, Pike with his laptop, Hutch wiping down the stove, the empty stools and the dim lights, and the smell of chili and coffee and leather, and the particular warmth of a place where people chose to be. Yeah, Damon said. Maybe it does. Later that night, after Ethan had fallen asleep on the couch in the back room, with the lock engaged and a blanket pulled to his chin and the oversized boots still on his feet because he wasn't yet ready to take them off. In a place that might not be there in the morning, Damon walked outside one last time. He knelt beside the Harley. He placed the challenge coin on the ground beneath the front tire, not hidden, not buried, just resting there on the cold asphalt where anyone who looked would see it. A brass eagle. A dead man's initials. And inside, sealed in a compartment no larger than a thumbnail, a strip of waterproof paper with GPS coordinates that had led to the truth and 2 words that had set a brother free. He stood. He looked at the sky. He breathed. Then he walked back inside, closed the door, and sat down at the bar next to a cup of cold coffee and a pencil drawing of a motorcycle under stars. And for the first time in 20 years, he didn't think about what he had lost. He thought about what had been found. The engines were silent. The story was over. And somewhere in the clear, cold, indifferent dark above a forgotten Midwestern town, an eagle flew. Crude, imperfect, drawn by hands that no longer existed in this world but had etched themselves so deeply into brass and memory and the stubborn architecture of love that they would never, ever be erased.